Across oceans and inland seas, ships have vanished without warning, some swallowed by storms, others consumed by fire, and many simply gone without explanation. From the USS Cyclops, the Navy's greatest unsolved loss, to her sister ships Proteus and Nereus, from the Marine Sulphur Queen, to the so-called Titanic of the South, Warada, and the mysterious disappearance of HMS Atlanta. The tragedies of the Edmund Fitzgerald, Valencia, and the replica Bounty haunt the waves. Ghost ships like the Kamloops, Emperor, Algoma, and Milwaukee still rest in the Great Lakes' cold silence. And from Le Griffin of 1679 to Cold War submarine HMS Affray, their stories endure, mysteries the sea has never surrendered. The vanishing of the USS Cyclops. The ocean holds many secrets. Among its countless mysteries, one disappearance stands as one of the most perplexing in naval history: the vanishing of the USS Cyclops. A massive American naval collier, she was the pride of her fleet. Yet in March of 1918, without a trace, she disappeared with over 300 men aboard, leaving behind one of the greatest maritime enigmas of the 20th century. Setting the stage, the USS Cyclops was no ordinary ship. Built in 1910, she was a Proteus-class collier, designed to carry immense loads of coal and cargo to fuel the expanding American Navy. At more than 540 feet in length, she was as large as a modern-day battleship of her era. With her cavernous holds and steel-reinforced structure, she could transport nearly 12,000 tons of material. Her service was vital. During World War I, coal was the lifeblood of naval fleets, powering everything from battleships to transport vessels. The Cyclops became a critical asset for the U.S. Navy, ferrying coal and supplies across the Atlantic. Her size and reputation earned her a commanding presence in every port she entered. But it was this very ship, strong, dependable, and seemingly invulnerable, that would become the centerpiece of an enduring mystery. The final voyage in early 1918, the Cyclops was assigned to transport manganese ore, a crucial resource for steel production. She loaded nearly 11,000 tons of it in Brazil before setting sail for Baltimore. On board were 309 crew members and passengers, sailors, officers, and a few civilians. Commanding the ship was Captain George Worley, a man whose leadership style and personality would later be called into question. The Cyclops departed Rio de Janeiro in late February, stopping briefly in Barbados for supplies. On March 4, 1918, she left the island bound for Baltimore. From that moment on, no confirmed message or sighting of the Cyclops was ever recorded again. She simply vanished. A nation in shock when the ship failed to arrive on schedule, the Navy launched an extensive search. Every shipping lane between Barbados and the American coastline was scanned. Battleships and aircraft were dispatched to scour the seas. Yet, nothing was found. No wreckage, no lifeboats, no oil slicks, not even a fragment of the 19,000-ton vessel. The disappearance was so complete that it stunned military officials and families alike. President Woodrow Wilson himself remarked, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." To this day, no conclusive evidence of the Cyclops has ever been located. Theories and speculation. The unexplained loss of the Cyclops sparked a century of speculation. Several theories have been put forward, some grounded in fact, others drifting toward legend. 1. Structural failure. Some naval experts suggest the ship may have suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The Cyclops was heavily loaded with manganese ore, which is both dense and heavy. If improperly balanced, the cargo could have shifted during the voyage, destabilizing the ship. Combined with rough seas, it might have caused the vessel to capsize suddenly, sinking before a distress call could be sent. 2. Storms and rogue waves. The North Atlantic is infamous for violent storms and unpredictable waves. A rogue wave, towering walls of water that appear without warning, could have overwhelmed even a ship as large as the Cyclops. Yet, the absence of debris makes this theory difficult to prove. 3. Enemy sabotage. World War I was raging at the time. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking countless Allied vessels. Some historians have speculated that the Cyclops may have been torpedoed. However, no German records have ever confirmed such an attack, and the silence of the crew remains puzzling. 4. The captain's role. Captain George Worley was an enigmatic figure. German-born, he faced suspicion during the war years, and many crew members reportedly disliked his stern, sometimes erratic leadership. Rumors suggest discipline aboard the ship was fraying. Some even speculated about mutiny, though this remains purely conjecture, with no evidence to support it. 5. The Bermuda Triangle. Perhaps the most famous theory links the Cyclops to the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Her last reported location lies within the boundaries of the infamous Triangle, a region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Over the years, stories of planes and ships disappearing here have grown into folklore. Was the Cyclops the Triangle's first great victim? Or is this just a convenient myth layered over an already unexplained tragedy? A lingering mystery. The loss of the Cyclops remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. 309 souls vanished into the Atlantic without leaving a trace. Families were left with unanswered questions, and the Navy never issued a definitive explanation. In the years following, two sister ships of the Cyclops, the Proteus and the Nereus, also vanished mysteriously during World War II while carrying heavy cargo. Like the Cyclops, they disappeared without trace, adding fuel to the belief that design flaws or hidden dangers in the Atlantic might have played a role. Searching for answers. Modern technology has provided new tools in the hunt for the Cyclops. Deep-sea exploration and sonar mapping continue to scan the ocean floor. The wreck of the Titanic was eventually discovered after decades of searching, raising hope that the Cyclops too may one day be found. Yet, the Atlantic is vast, and the precise route she took remains uncertain. Without a known crash site, the search is akin to finding a needle in a haystack. Still, maritime archaeologists and naval historians persist, believing that somewhere beneath the waves lies the final resting place of the Cyclops. Closing reflection. The story of the USS Cyclops is not just a tale of loss at sea, it is a reminder of how much of our world remains unexplored. In an age when satellites map the skies and technology guides our every step, the ocean still guards its secrets fiercely. What happened to the Cyclops? Did she succumb to the forces of nature, or was there something more sinister at play? Until the wreck is found, the truth lies hidden beneath the rolling waves of the Atlantic, silent, enduring, and unresolved. The mystery of the USS Proteus. The ocean has always been both a pathway and a graveyard. Across centuries, countless vessels have set sail never to return, swallowed by the silent depths. Among these forgotten tragedies lies the disappearance of the USS Proteus, a ship that vanished in 1941, leaving behind only questions, theories, and a void in naval history. Setting the stage. The USS Proteus was not a warship bristling with guns, nor a sleek destroyer racing across the waves. She was a collier, a bulk cargo ship built to carry heavy supplies for the U.S. Navy. But her role was no less vital. In an era when coal-powered fleets and raw materials fueled war, colliers like Proteus were the lifelines of naval operations. Constructed in 1912, the Proteus was part of the Proteus-class colliers, a line of massive, steel-hulled vessels designed for endurance and heavy loads. Stretching more than 540 feet in length and weighing over 19,000 tons when fully loaded, she was a floating giant of her time. Her cavernous holds could carry thousands of tons of coal or ore, supplies that kept war machines moving. She was the sister ship of the infamous USS Cyclops, which had mysteriously vanished during World War I in 1918. At the time, few could imagine history would repeat itself. Yet just over 2 decades later, the Atlantic would once again claim a vessel of this class without leaving a trace. The war years. By the late 1930s, the world had entered another global conflict. World War II brought with it a desperate demand for resources, steel, coal, and metals essential for shipbuilding, weapons, and machinery. The Proteus, like her sister ships, was pressed into service to transport these crucial supplies. In November of 1941, the ship was tasked with carrying a heavy cargo of bauxite, the primary ore used in the production of aluminum. Aluminum was in high demand for aircraft construction, and securing steady shipments was critical for the Allied war effort. The cargo was loaded in St. Thomas, in the Virgin Islands. The Proteus, under the command of Captain M. H. Randall, prepared to set sail for the east coast of the United States. On board were 58 crew members, sailors who had made this routine journey before. There was little to suggest that this voyage would be any different from the countless others. On November 23, 1941, the Proteus left port. She was expected in the United States within several days. She never arrived. Silence in the Atlantic at first, the delay raised only mild concern. Communication during wartime was often disrupted, and naval ships sometimes altered courses to avoid detection by enemy submarines. But as days passed with no word, anxiety grew. By early December, the Proteus was officially declared missing. The U.S. Navy launched investigations and searches, but the effort yielded nothing. Not a single distress signal had been received. No wreckage, no life rafts, no bodies were ever recovered. It was as if the ship had simply dissolved into the sea. The timing only deepened the mystery. The disappearance occurred mere weeks before the attack on Pearl Harbor. With the United States soon to be thrust into full-scale war, the loss of the Proteus became overshadowed by larger events, fading quickly from headlines but never from the minds of the families left behind. Theories of disappearance. The loss of the Proteus mirrored that of her sister ship, Cyclops, and later, another sister vessel, the USS Nereus. All three vanished while carrying heavy loads of ore, all without sending distress calls, and all within the Atlantic region often linked to maritime mysteries. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain what happened to the Proteus. 1. Structural weakness. The Proteus-class ships were massive, but size can also mask flaws. Some naval engineers believe the design had inherent weaknesses. The ships were long and heavily burdened with cargo. Under stress from the sea, their steel hulls may have been prone to structural fatigue. When carrying bauxite, the risks multiplied. Bauxite is extremely dense and heavy. If not carefully distributed, it could create uneven stress across the ship's frame. A sudden shift of the ore in rough seas might have caused catastrophic failure, snapping the vessel in two or pulling her under before a distress call could be made. This theory gains weight considering the fate of her sisters. The Cyclops and the Nereus were both carrying ore when they disappeared, suggesting a possible pattern of structural vulnerability under heavy load. 2. Enemy action. The timing of the Proteus's disappearance was precarious. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking Allied shipping at alarming rates. Submarine warfare was relentless, and even large naval ships were not immune. It is possible the Proteus fell victim to a torpedo attack. If struck while heavily loaded, the ship might have gone down rapidly, leaving little evidence on the surface. However, no German records after the war ever confirmed the sinking of a ship matching the Proteus's description at that time and place. This lack of enemy claim leaves the U-boat theory unresolved. 3. Rogue waves and storms. The Atlantic is notorious for unpredictable weather. Rogue waves, massive walls of water appearing without warning, have been known to sink ships even in modern times. If the Proteus encountered such a phenomenon, combined with her heavy cargo, survival would have been unlikely. Still, storms usually leave some trace: wreckage, lifeboats, floating cargo. The total absence of debris raises questions about whether weather alone could account for the ship's complete disappearance. 4. The Bermuda Triangle. Perhaps the most sensational theory is tied to geography. The last known position of the Proteus placed her route within the region now popularized as the Bermuda Triangle, an area between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda long associated with disappearances of ships and aircraft. With the Cyclops and Nereus also vanishing in roughly the same waters, the link to the triangle has been cemented in popular imagination. While most scientists dismissed the Bermuda Triangle as myth, pointing instead to natural hazards like storms, magnetic anomalies, or human error, the coincidence of three sister ships disappearing in similar fashion keeps the legend alive. A pattern of loss. What makes the Proteus case particularly haunting is the pattern it forms with her sister vessels. USS Cyclops, 1918, disappeared with 309 men aboard while carrying manganese ore. USS Proteus, 1941 disappeared with 58 men while transporting bauxite. USS Nereus, 1941 vanished just weeks after Proteus, also carrying bauxite, with 61 men lost. 3 ships, 3 disappearances, 3 cargoes of dense ore, all gone without a trace. This pattern has led many historians to suspect a design flaw or material weakness specific to the class. Yet, despite decades of analysis, no conclusive proof has been found. The human element beyond the theories and speculation lies the human cost. 58 sailors aboard the Proteus never returned. Families waited for news that never came. In wartime, loss was common, but the absence of answers carried its own torment. Unlike combat deaths, there were no witnesses, no survivors, no memorial service with a casket. For loved ones, grief was suspended in uncertainty. The Proteus became not just a missing ship, but a void in the lives of those connected to her crew. Searching the depths today, the disappearance of the Proteus remains unsolved. The Atlantic Ocean is vast, its floor largely unmapped. Modern technology, sonar scanning, submersibles, and autonomous drones, has uncovered long-lost wrecks like the Titanic and the USS Indianapolis. Yet the Proteus has never been located. Her remains may lie thousands of feet below, buried in silt and darkness. Finding her would require not only resources but also a more precise idea of where she last sailed. Without a distress signal or confirmed sightings, the search area spans hundreds of miles, a daunting task even with modern tools. Closing reflection: the story of the USS Proteus is not just about a missing ship. It is about patterns that defy explanation, about the thin line between strength and fragility on the open sea, and about the mysteries that continue to haunt human history. Did she succumb to a fatal flaw in her design? Was she struck down by an enemy's torpedo? Did the sea itself rise up against her in the form of a storm or a rogue wave? Or does her fate lie within that strange corner of the Atlantic so often whispered about as the Bermuda Triangle? Until her wreck is found, the questions will linger. Like her sister ships before and after, the Proteus remains a ghost of the sea, a steel giant erased from the surface of the world, leaving only silence and speculation in her wake. The ocean keeps its secrets well. And perhaps, deep beneath the waves, the Proteus still waits, unseen, but never forgotten. The vanishing of the USS Nereus: the sea does not easily give up its secrets. For centuries, entire ships have slipped beneath the waves, vanishing without a trace. Some losses are remembered as tragedies of war. Others linger as mysteries, resisting every attempt at explanation. Among these is the fate of the USS Nereus, a U.S. Navy collier that disappeared in December of 1941, leaving behind one of the most enduring puzzles in maritime history. The Proteus-class: the Nereus was part of the Proteus-class colliers, a group of 4 massive vessels constructed in the early 20th century to serve the logistical needs of the Navy. These ships, the Cyclops, Proteus, Jupiter, and Nereus, were designed to carry coal and ore, materials that powered both industry and war. At more than 540 feet in length and displacing nearly 19,000 tons when fully loaded, they were giants of their day. Their cavernous holds could carry thousands of tons of cargo, while their steel hulls promised strength and durability. Yet the history of this class is riddled with strange misfortune. The USS Cyclops vanished in 1918 with 309 people aboard. The USS Proteus disappeared in November 1941 with 58 men. Just weeks later, the USS Nereus would follow. 3 sister ships, 3 vanishings, all under eerily similar circumstances. Service before the war: the USS Nereus was launched in 1913, joining the Navy during a time when the United States was expanding its presence on the seas. Like her sisters, she was a collier, not glamorous, but essential. She ferried coal, raw materials, and supplies to keep naval operations running. During the 1920s and 1930s, the Nereus served steadily, crossing the Atlantic and the Caribbean, a workhorse of naval logistics. By 1941, as World War II consumed Europe and Asia, the United States prepared for its inevitable entry into the conflict. The Nereus, like many older ships, was reassigned to meet the growing demand for cargo transport. The final voyage in December 1941, the Nereus was ordered to transport a vital cargo of bauxite ore, the raw material used in aluminum production. Aluminum was critical for building aircraft, and the Allies were desperate for steady supply. On December 10, 1941, the Nereus departed from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, bound for Canada. She carried 61 officers and crew. Her holds were packed with thousands of tons of dense ore. It was only 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The world was in chaos, the Atlantic swarming with German U-boats. Tensions were high, but the voyage itself was routine. These were waters the Nereus had sailed many times before. Yet, after leaving St. Thomas, the Nereus was never heard from again. Silence. No distress call was received. No lifeboats were found. No wreckage washed ashore. The Nereus, her crew, and her cargo simply vanished. For the families of the 61 men aboard, the days of waiting turned into weeks, then months. By early 1942, the ship was declared lost, presumed sunk. But the absence of evidence left an open wound, no answers, no closure, only mystery. Theories of disappearance. The vanishing of the Nereus so soon after the loss of the Proteus raised alarm. 2 massive ships of the same class had vanished within weeks, carrying the same cargo along similar routes. Was it coincidence? Or was there a hidden danger tied to these ships? 1. Structural weakness. The most widely accepted theory is that the Proteus-class ships were inherently vulnerable. Their long steel hulls, when heavily burdened with dense cargo like bauxite, may have been prone to structural failure. Bauxite is deceptively dangerous cargo. Its weight is immense, and if improperly distributed, it can strain a ship's frame unevenly. In heavy seas, a sudden shift of or might snap a hull or cause rapid flooding. If the Nereus suffered such a failure, she may have gone down so quickly that no distress signal could be sent. The fact that Cyclops and Proteus vanished under similar conditions lends weight to this possibility. 2. Enemy action. December 1941 was one of the most dangerous months to sail the Atlantic. German U-boats were actively targeting Allied shipping, sinking hundreds of vessels in what came to be known as the Second Happy Time for the German Navy. It is entirely possible that the Nereus was torpedoed. A direct hit on a ship heavily laden with or might have caused her to sink rapidly, leaving little floating wreckage. Yet, after the war, captured German naval records made no mention of sinking a vessel matching the Nereus. Some historians believe that a U-boat could have destroyed her without recording the kill, but the lack of confirmation keeps this theory unproven. 3. Rogue waves or storms. The Atlantic is notorious for sudden storms and rogue waves, immense walls of water capable of capsizing even large vessels. If the Nereus encountered such a phenomenon, especially while heavy with ore, survival would have been nearly impossible. But again, the mystery deepens with the absence of debris. Even storm wrecks usually leave evidence. The Nereus left none. 4. The Bermuda Triangle. The Nereus sailed directly through the region now known as the Bermuda Triangle, an area stretching between Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and Florida, often linked to tales of vanished ships and aircraft. Skeptics dismiss the triangle as myth, noting that disappearances in the area are statistically unremarkable. Yet the fact remains, 3 sister ships of the same class vanished in or near the same waters, all carrying heavy ore. The coincidence is difficult to ignore, and it has fed the triangle's enduring legend. The pattern. Looking at the record, the Nereus's loss seems less like an isolated incident and more like part of a troubling pattern. Cyclops, 1918, lost with 309 people, carrying manganese ore. Proteus, November 1941, lost with 58 people, carrying bauxite ore. Nereus, December 1941, lost with 61 people, carrying bauxite ore. 3 ships, 3 disappearances, all with heavy ore cargoes. Not one piece of wreckage from any of them has ever been conclusively identified. The pattern raises a haunting possibility: were these vessels doomed by design? Or did fate conspire against them in ways beyond human understanding? Human cost behind the numbers were lives, 61 men aboard the Nereus, sailors far from home, serving their country in wartime. For their families, the loss was compounded by uncertainty. Without bodies, without wreckage, there were no funerals, no graves. The silence of the sea became their memorial. Loved ones clung to hope for months, even years, that survivors might be found on some remote island. But hope eventually gave way to resignation. Modern searches, unlike the Titanic or other famous wrecks, the Nereus has never been located. The Atlantic floor is vast and largely unexplored. Finding a single shipwreck without a precise last position is like searching for a grain of sand on a beach. Modern sonar and submersible technology could one day reveal her remains. Wrecks from both world wars continue to be discovered even a century later. But until such a day, the Nereus remains missing, locked in the silence of the ocean. Reflection: the disappearance of the USS Nereus remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of naval history. Like her sisters Cyclops and Proteus, she left no clues, only questions. Was it flawed design? Enemy torpedoes? The wrath of the sea itself? Or something stranger, something that defies the boundaries of explanation? Until her wreck is found, the Nereus drifts in history as both a tragedy and a riddle. She stands as a reminder of the ocean's vast power, and of how much it still hides from us. The Atlantic holds her secrets well. Somewhere in its depths lies the answer, waiting in silence. The vanishing of the SS Marine Sulphur Queen. The sea is vast, unpredictable, and often merciless. Ships vanish in its depths with alarming regularity, some lost to storms, others to human error or mechanical failure. But some disappearances remain unresolved, lingering like a shadow over maritime history. Among them, one case stands out: the vanishing of the SS Marine Sulphur Queen in 1963. A modern ship, carrying an unusual cargo, gone without a trace. 69 men lost, and no definitive explanation. A ship with a history. The Marine Sulphur Queen began life not as a chemical carrier, but as a T2 oil tanker, built during World War II. These tankers were the workhorses of the war, built quickly and in massive numbers to transport petroleum across oceans. After the war, many were sold to private companies or converted for other uses. In 1960, the tanker was extensively modified to carry molten sulfur, a valuable but volatile material used in fertilizer, rubber processing, and chemicals. To do this, her owners fitted her with a vast insulated tank system, capable of carrying over 15,000 tons of liquid sulfur, heated to nearly 270 degrees Fahrenheit to keep it in molten form. The conversion was ambitious, turning an aging wartime tanker into a specialized chemical carrier. Yet questions were raised even then about whether the modifications were safe. The final voyage on February 2, 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen left Beaumont, Texas. She carried 15,260 tons of molten sulfur in her heated tanks. Her destination was Norfolk, Virginia, a route that would take her across the Gulf of Mexico and up the U.S. East Coast. On board were 39 officers and crew, along with 30 additional men, a total of 69 souls. For many, it was another routine voyage. The seas were calm, the weather fair. But the ship never arrived. Her last known radio contact was made on February 4, when she reported her position south of Florida, near the Straits of Florida. Everything seemed normal. After that, silence. The search. When the ship failed to arrive in Norfolk, the Coast Guard launched a massive search operation. Aircraft and ships scoured the waters of the Straits of Florida and the southern Atlantic. They found only fragments. A few life jackets. Pieces of debris. Some charred life preservers. A life ring marked with the ship's name. But no hull, no wreckage field, no bodies. The Gulf Stream current was strong in the region, making it difficult to determine where the debris originated. The trail went cold quickly. The Marine Sulphur Queen was officially declared lost with all hands. Investigating the mystery. The loss of the ship triggered an extensive Coast Guard investigation. What could cause a massive vessel to vanish so completely, leaving only scattered debris? Several troubling possibilities emerged. 1. Structural weakness. The Marine Sulphur Queen was nearly 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. As a T2 tanker, her hull had already endured decades of stress. Many T2s had been plagued by structural issues, some broke apart at sea due to metal fatigue, faulty welding, or weak design. The conversion to carry molten sulfur placed new stresses on her frame. Her insulated sulfur tanks were immense and heavy, concentrated in one area of the ship. Naval architects later suggested this caused unusual strain, making her more prone to cracking or breaking in rough seas. If her hull failed suddenly, she may have split apart and sunk in minutes. The crew would have had no time to send a distress call. 2. Cargo hazards. Molten sulfur itself is dangerous cargo. Not only must it be kept at high temperature, but when exposed to seawater, it can create toxic hydrogen sulfide gas, which is lethal even in small amounts. If a rupture or leak occurred in the tanks, toxic fumes could have incapacitated the crew before they had a chance to respond. A sudden explosion or chemical reaction might also have destroyed the vessel outright. The charred life jackets and life preservers recovered lend some support to the possibility of fire or explosion. 3. Weather and rogue waves. While the weather on February 4 was described as generally calm, the Straits of Florida are notorious for sudden squalls and steep waves driven by the Gulf Stream. A rogue wave or sudden storm could have overwhelmed the vessel, particularly if structural weaknesses were already present. But again, such events usually leave more wreckage. The almost total absence of debris remains puzzling. 4. The Bermuda Triangle. Inevitably, the loss of the Marine Sulphur Queen became tied to the lore of the Bermuda Triangle. Her last reported position was near the eastern boundary of this infamous region, already associated in the popular imagination with unexplained vanishings of ships and aircraft. While most experts dismissed the triangle as folklore, the fact that the Queen vanished in its waters gave the legend new fuel. A modern ship, gone without explanation, seemed to confirm suspicions of something sinister about the region. The investigation's conclusions. In its final report, the Coast Guard could not identify a single definitive cause. Instead, it highlighted a series of concerns. The ship's structural condition was questionable. The conversion to carry sulfur had likely weakened her further. The cargo itself was hazardous, with potential for fire, explosion, or toxic gas leaks. The report concluded that the Marine Sulphur Queen was an unseaworthy vessel at the time of her final voyage. But without wreckage, the exact cause could not be proven. The case remains officially unresolved. Patterns of loss. The Marine Sulphur Queen was not the first ship to vanish in the Straits of Florida, nor would she be the last. The area, a choke point for shipping, swept by strong currents and sudden weather, has long been hazardous. But the Queen's disappearance stands out because she was a relatively modern ship, operating in an age of advanced navigation and communication. Her complete absence defies simple explanation. The human cost beyond the engineering reports and maritime theories are the 69 men who never returned. They were fathers, brothers, sons. Their families waited for news, clinging to the hope of survivors, but none were ever found. For these families, the lack of answers was its own torment. Without wreckage or bodies, there could be no closure, only an enduring mystery. Modern perspectives today, more than 60 years later, the wreck of the Marine Sulphur Queen has never been located. Advances in sonar mapping and deep-sea exploration have revealed many lost ships, but the Gulf Stream may have carried her remains far from her last reported position. Maritime historians generally believe she succumbed to structural failure exacerbated by her dangerous cargo. But in the absence of hard evidence, the debate continues. Her story is often cited as a warning about the risks of ship conversion, the dangers of hazardous cargo, and the tendency to push aging vessels beyond their safe limits. Closing reflection. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen was a ship transformed by human ingenuity, a wartime tanker remade into a modern chemical carrier. Yet in the end, she may also have been undone by the very modifications meant to extend her usefulness. Her disappearance is not just a story of a ship lost at sea. It is a reminder of the balance between technology and nature, between human ambition and the ocean's unforgiving power. What happened to her on that February night in 1963? Did her steel hull give way, breaking apart silently in the dark? Did fire and fumes overwhelm her crew in minutes? Or did something more elusive, more mysterious, claim her in the waters where so many ships have vanished before? Until her wreck is found, the Marine Sulphur Queen remains adrift in history, a ghost ship of the modern age, carried forward not by wind or current, but by the enduring mystery of her fate. The vanishing of the Warada, the Titanic of the South. The ocean is filled with stories of triumph and tragedy. Ships that carried hopes, dreams, and lives across vast waters, some remembered for their grandeur, others for the mysteries that surrounded their end. Among them, one ship stands out, the Warada. A grand passenger liner hailed as the Titanic of the South. But unlike the Titanic, whose wreck lies known at the bottom of the Atlantic, the Warada simply vanished. More than 200 people were aboard when she disappeared in 1909, and to this day, her fate remains one of the great maritime enigmas. A ship of grandeur, the SS Warada, was built in 1908 by the shipbuilders Barclay, Coral Company in Glasgow, Scotland. She was designed for the Blue Anchor Line to serve the busy route between Europe, South Africa, and Australia. The ship was a beauty of her era. At nearly 500 feet long and weighing over 9,000 tons, she was not as large as the Titanic, but she carried an aura of luxury and modernity. First-class passengers enjoyed elegant dining rooms, a music lounge, a spacious promenade deck, and comfortable cabins. She was fitted with advanced safety features for her time, including watertight bulkheads and powerful steam engines capable of maintaining a steady 13 knots. The Warada was marketed as more than just a vessel, she was an experience. For many, she symbolized progress and prestige, a floating palace connecting the continents. The maiden voyages, her first voyage to Australia in 1908, went smoothly, though not without minor complaints. Some passengers noted that she had a tendency to roll heavily in rough seas, leading to seasickness. Still, the ship's reputation grew, and her grandeur earned her the nickname, the Titanic of the South. Her second voyage, however, would prove to be her last. The final journey on July 1, 1909, the Warada departed London on her second voyage, bound for Australia. She carried a mixed complement of passengers, wealthy travelers, emigrants seeking new lives, families, businessmen, along with a full crew. The outward journey to Australia went without major incident. On the return leg, she left Durban, South Africa, on July 26, 1909, heading for Cape Town. On board were approximately 211 people, 92 passengers and 119 crew. Among them was a prominent businessman, Captain Edward Ilbery, and several families bound for England. Spirits were high. The Warada was considered a safe, modern vessel, and few could have imagined the tragedy to come. Last sightings on July 27, 1909, the Warada was sighted by the steamer Clan MacIntyre, sailing in the same direction. The weather was fair at the time, though reports of storms were noted further along the coast. The captain of the Clan MacIntyre later recalled that the Warada appeared steady and in good condition. That night, the two ships drifted apart. The next day, the Clan MacIntyre battled heavy seas and strong winds near the Transkei coast of South Africa. The Warada, however, was never seen again. No distress signals were sent. No wreckage was ever found. The shock when the Warada failed to arrive in Cape Town, alarm spread quickly. Families waited anxiously at the docks. The South African government launched an extensive search, deploying ships and scouring the coastline. Weeks turned into months. Debris spotted offshore often turned out to be false leads, mere driftwood or remnants of other vessels. Despite the largest maritime search South Africa had ever seen up to that point, no trace of the Warada or her passengers was discovered. The disappearance captured worldwide attention. How could such a large and modern vessel simply vanish on a heavily traveled route, leaving no evidence? Theories of disappearance. Over the decades, numerous theories have attempted to explain the fate of the Warada. None have been definitively proven, but each offers a glimpse into the possibilities. 1. Design flaws and instability. One of the most persistent theories is that the Warada was inherently unstable. Some survivors from her first voyage reported that she rolled uncomfortably, especially in heavy seas. Naval architects later suggested that her design, with heavy cargo holds and high superstructures, made her top-heavy. If she encountered rough seas along the Transkei coast, she may have capsized suddenly. In such a scenario, the ship could have gone down within minutes, giving passengers and crew no chance to signal for help. 2. Rogue wave. The waters off South Africa's east coast are notorious for violent conditions. The Agulhas Current, a powerful stream flowing southward, often collides with opposing winds, creating massive, steep waves. Some can reach heights of 60 feet or more. A rogue wave striking the Warada broadside could have capsized her instantly. Modern studies confirm that such waves are not rare in the region, adding credibility to this theory. 3. Boiler explosion. Another possibility is catastrophic mechanical failure. The Warada's engines and boilers were powerful but also prone to danger if not maintained properly. A sudden boiler explosion could have torn through the ship, sinking her rapidly. However, critics argue that such an explosion would have left some floating debris, yet none was ever found. 4. Fire in the cargo. The Warada was carrying a large cargo, including jute and coal. Both materials are prone to spontaneous combustion if improperly stored. A fire deep in the holds could have spread uncontrollably, forcing the crew to abandon ship. But again, no lifeboats or wreckage were ever recovered. 5. Human error. Some maritime historians suggest navigational mistakes may have played a role. If the Warada strayed too close to shore during a storm, she could have struck hidden reefs or run aground before capsizing. Yet no wreck has ever been found along the South African coast to confirm this. 6. The Bermuda Triangle of the South. Over time, the Warada's disappearance has been linked to legends of the so-called South African Bermuda Triangle, the storm-racked stretch of water between Durban and Cape Town where other vessels have also been lost without explanation. While this may lean toward folklore, the Warada's story continues to fuel the mystique of this region as a dangerous maritime graveyard. The human cost beyond speculation lies. The sobering reality: 211 lives were lost. Entire families vanished. Letters, personal belongings, and legacies disappeared with them. The loss devastated communities across Britain, Australia, and South Africa. Newspapers published photographs of the missing, and memorials were erected, but for loved ones, grief remained unresolved. Unlike the Titanic, there were no survivors to recount final moments, no wreckage to study, no graves to visit. Only silence. Search efforts. Through the years and the decades after the disappearance, many attempts were made to locate the wreck. Explorers and divers scoured the South African coast, but the ocean floor in the region is treacherous, deep, rugged, and often obscured by strong currents. False discoveries were occasionally reported, but none confirmed. As recently as the 21st century, sonar and deep-water surveys have continued to probe the seabed, yet the Warada's final resting place remains undiscovered. Some believe she lies far out to sea, pulled southward by the powerful Agulhas Current before sinking into deep water beyond the continental shelf. Legacy. The Warada has been called the Titanic of the South, not only for her grandeur, but for the scale of her tragedy. Yet unlike the Titanic, her story ends without answers. She has become a symbol of maritime mystery, her name invoked whenever the sea's unpredictability is discussed. The disappearance also marked the decline of the Blue Anchor Line. The company, already struggling financially, could not recover from the loss. Within a few years, it ceased operations entirely. For maritime historians, the Warada remains one of the great ghost ships of history, not in the sense of being found adrift, but in the way her memory lingers, spectral and unresolved. Closing reflection. The fate of the Warada remains an unsolved riddle more than a century later. Was she doomed by design? Overwhelmed by the fury of the Agulhas Current? Destroyed by fire or explosion? Or did some combination of these factors conspire to bring about her sudden end? Until her wreck is found, the Warada lives on only in speculation and memory, a ship once celebrated for her elegance, remembered now for her disappearance. The ocean hides her secret still. Somewhere off the coast of South Africa, the Titanic of the South may rest, shrouded in silence, a reminder that even the most beautiful creations of man can vanish without a trace when confronted with the power of the sea. The disappearance of HMS Atlanta. The sea has always been both a teacher and a destroyer. It nurtures trade, expands empires, and tests the limits of human skill. Yet time and again, it swallows ships whole, leaving behind nothing but questions. Among the most enduring of these mysteries is the disappearance of HMS Atlanta, a Royal Navy training ship that vanished in 1880 with more than 280 men aboard. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. Only silence. A ship of training and tradition, the Atlanta began life under a different name. She was launched in 1844 as the HMS Juno, a 26-gun sixth-rate frigate. By the 1860s, as steam power began to eclipse sail, she was no longer suited for frontline combat. Rather than scrap her, the Royal Navy converted her into a training vessel. Renamed HMS Atlanta in 1878, she was assigned a new role, training young naval cadets in seamanship, navigation, and discipline. For many, she was the first step into a career at sea. But while her purpose changed, her design did not. The Atlanta remained a large, heavy sailing ship, majestic, but not modern. At a time when steam and ironclads were reshaping naval warfare, she was already a relic. The final voyage on January 31, 1880, HMS Atlanta set sail from Bermuda, bound for Falmouth, England. She carried a complement of about 281 men, most of them teenage cadets, along with officers and crew. The ship was heavily laden. Not only were her holds filled with stores for the long Atlantic crossing, but her decks carried more men than usual. Eyewitnesses later claimed she was overcrowded, perhaps dangerously so. Still, for the cadets, this was meant to be a routine voyage, a final stage of training before joining the fleet. None could have foreseen that it would end in tragedy. Into the Atlantic the weather at first was fair. Reports from other ships in the region described calm seas and moderate winds in early February. But as the Atlanta pushed eastward into the Atlantic, conditions began to worsen. The winter of 1880 was notoriously stormy in the North Atlantic. Powerful gales lashed the shipping lanes, and waves rose to terrifying heights. For a modern steel ship with engines, survival was difficult. For an aging wooden frigate like the Atlanta, it may have been impossible. After her departure from Bermuda, she was never sighted again. Silence and shock when weeks passed without word, concern spread through the Royal Navy. Families of the cadets waited anxiously in England, scanning the horizon for sails that would never appear. By spring, the ship was officially declared lost with all hands. The news struck Britain hard. The death toll, more than 280, made it one of the greatest peacetime disasters in Royal Navy history. Yet what unsettled the nation most was not only the scale of loss, but the complete absence of answers. No bodies, no wreckage, no lifeboats were ever recovered. Theories of disappearance over the years, historians, sailors, and investigators have debated what happened to HMS Atlanta. Several theories have emerged, each offering possibilities but no certainty. 1. Overcrowding and inexperience. The Atlanta was filled with young cadets, many of them teenagers, with limited experience at sea. Reports from her departure suggested the ship carried more men than she was designed for, crowding her decks and adding to her weight. With so many inexperienced sailors, handling the ship in heavy storms would have been a monumental challenge. Some suggest she may have capsized simply because her crew lacked the skill and strength to save her in crisis. 2. Severe storms. The winter of 1880 was brutal. Multiple merchant ships recorded violent gales and high seas in February. Meteorological data confirms that a major storm system swept the North Atlantic in the very days the Atlanta would have been crossing. Caught in such conditions, a wooden sailing vessel, already aging and possibly structurally weak, may have been overwhelmed. A sudden squall or rogue wave could have rolled her onto her side, flooding her holds and sinking her within minutes. 3. Design instability. Naval architects later speculated that the Atlanta, like many frigates of her type, may have been inherently unstable when fully loaded. Her high masts and heavy rigging could make her top-heavy. Combined with overcrowding in cargo, she may have been prone to capsizing in rough seas. 4. Structural weakness. By 1880, the Atlanta was more than 35 years old, an advanced age for a wooden warship. Rot, weakened timbers, or flaws from her conversion may have made her less seaworthy than the Admiralty realized. Under storm stress, her hull could have failed catastrophically. 5. The Bermuda Triangle. Although the term Bermuda Triangle was not coined until the mid-20th century, some modern writers have linked the Atlanta's disappearance to that infamous region of alleged vanishings. She did indeed depart from Bermuda, and her last known course took her through waters often tied to maritime folklore. While most historians dismiss this as coincidence, the association has kept the Atlanta alive in popular mystery lore. Echoes of tragedy. The loss of HMS Atlanta was not unique in the annals of naval training ships. Her predecessor, HMS Eurydice, another training vessel, had capsized in 1878 during a sudden squall near the Isle of Wight, drowning more than 300 men. That tragedy had already raised questions about the wisdom of training so many cadets on outdated sailing ships. When the Atlanta vanished only 2 years later, critics were quick to condemn the Admiralty for putting young sailors at such risk. The human cost. The men lost aboard the Atlanta were not hardened veterans but young trainees, many barely out of school. Their deaths devastated families across Britain. Newspapers published lists of names, accompanied by photographs of grieving parents. For these families, the worst wound was uncertainty. With no wreckage, no graves, and no survivors, they had no closure. Their sons had vanished into the ocean without trace, leaving only memory behind. The search for answers. Over the years, there have been occasional claims of wreckage sighted, wooden timbers, ship's fittings, debris washed ashore in the Azores or the Caribbean. Yet none were ever conclusively linked to the Atlanta. Modern efforts to locate her wreck have been hampered by the sheer scale of the Atlantic. Without a last known position, the search is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Maritime archaeologists speculate that if she sank in deep water, her remains may lie thousands of meters down, beyond the reach of 19th-century technology and even much of today's. Legacy. The Atlanta's loss had a lasting impact on the Royal Navy. It fueled criticism of training practices, particularly the use of outdated sailing ships for instruction in an age of steam. Eventually, the Navy shifted to more modern training methods, reducing reliance on large sail-driven vessels filled with cadets. Yet despite reforms, the Atlanta herself remained a ghost ship in history, a reminder of how quickly the sea can erase even the largest of vessels. Closing reflection. The disappearance of HMS Atlanta is a story of youth, ambition, and tragedy. She was meant to shape the next generation of sailors, but instead became their tomb. Did she succumb to storms, overwhelmed by wind and wave? Did her old timbers fail under stress? Or was she simply too crowded, too unstable, too vulnerable to survive the Atlantic's winter fury? Until her wreck is found, the Atlanta remains an enigma, a ship that set sail full of promise and vanished into the endless silence of the sea. The ocean still holds her secret. And perhaps, deep beneath the waves, HMS Atlanta waits, unseen, but not forgotten. The final voyage of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The Great Lakes are often called inland seas, vast waters where storms rise with the fury of oceans, and ships vanish just as suddenly. Among all the tragedies written into their history, one name stands apart, etched forever into legend, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. A mighty ore carrier, proud and powerful, she was the largest ship ever to sail the lakes in her day. Yet in November 1975, she vanished in a storm, taking all 29 men aboard with her. No distress call, no survivors, and only fragments of evidence. Decades later, the question still lingers, What really happened to the pride of the American side? The launch of a giant, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was launched in 1958, built by Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. Commissioned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company and operated by the Columbia Transportation Division, she was named after the company's chairman. At 729 feet long and capable of carrying over 26,000 tons of iron ore, she was the largest ship on the Great Lakes at the time of her debut. Crowds of thousands gathered to watch her launch, a spectacle befitting a vessel of her size and grandeur. Nicknamed the Big Fitz, she quickly earned a reputation for speed, reliability, and elegance. With a sleek profile and powerful engines, she often set cargo records. For 2 decades she plied the lakes, hauling iron ore from mines near Duluth and Superior down to steel mills in Detroit, Toledo, and other ports. But even giants are not invincible. The final voyage on November 9, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald loaded 26,116 tons of taconite pellets at the Burlington Northern Dock in Superior, Wisconsin. She was bound for Zug Island near Detroit, carrying the raw material that would become steel. At her helm was Captain Ernest M. McSorley, a veteran sailor nearing retirement. Known for his calm under pressure, McSorley had guided countless voyages through the unpredictable waters of the lakes. Alongside her was another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson. The two ships would keep each other in sight for much of the journey. At first, conditions were calm. But in November, the Great Lakes are notorious for sudden storms. By the following day, weather reports warned of gale-force winds and heavy snow. The Fitz and the Anderson pressed on, as was common for seasoned freighters. Into the storm. By the morning of November 10, the storm intensified. Winds howled at over 50 knots. Waves rose above 25 feet, some sailors later reported waves over 35 feet. Snow squalls reduced visibility to near zero. The Edmund Fitzgerald, heavily loaded, battled the storm head-on. Communication between her and the Anderson was steady, with both ships reporting their progress. But by late afternoon, trouble loomed. The Fitzgerald radioed that she was taking on water and had developed a list. Her radar was down. She requested the Anderson to stay close behind, guiding her through the storm. At 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed his final message: "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar. She was gone. Silence. No distress signal was sent. No calls for help were made. One moment she was there, the next she had vanished beneath the waves. When the storm subsided, searchers found only fragments, life rafts, lifeboats, bits of debris. None of the crew were ever recovered. The loss shocked the region. 29 men, sailors, engineers, deckhands, had vanished without warning. Families grieved, communities mourned, and a mystery was born. Searching the depths within days, the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy launched sonar searches of Lake Superior. On November 14, 1975, they located the wreck. The Fitzgerald lay in 2 large pieces, about 530 feet apart, in 530 feet of water, 17 miles north-northwest of Whitefish Point. Her bow was upright, buried in the lakebed mud, while her stern lay twisted upside down. The ship had broken apart suddenly. But why? Theories of the sinking. Dozens of theories have been proposed to explain the loss of the Fitzgerald. None have been universally accepted. 1. Rogue wave / Three Sisters. Some believe the Fitz was struck by a phenomenon known as the Three Sisters, 3 massive waves in quick succession, each building higher than the last. In the confined waters of Lake Superior, such waves can rise over 30 feet. If the ship took 1 wave over her bow and 2 more in quick succession, she may have flooded and sunk almost instantly. Survivors of other ships have described such events, lending weight to this theory. 2. Structural failure. Others argue the Fitzgerald's hull may have suffered from metal fatigue. Built in 1958, she had endured years of strain and flexing. Some point to her long, narrow design as vulnerable under stress. When the wreck was surveyed, the ship was found in two large pieces, suggesting she may have broken apart on the surface before sinking, though some argue she broke apart upon hitting the lakebed. 3. Cargo hatch covers. A leading Coast Guard theory is that the ship's cargo hatches may not have been sealed properly. In heavy seas, waves could have poured tons of water into the holds. Gradually, the ship may have lost buoyancy until she suddenly plunged beneath the waves. Critics of this theory note that Captain McSorley was highly experienced and would have ensured hatches were secured. Still, in such a violent storm, even minor weaknesses could have been catastrophic. 4. Grounding on a shoal. Some suggest the Fitzgerald may have unknowingly struck a shoal, a hidden ridge of rocks near Caribou Island, opening her hull below the waterline. Already weakened, she may have then succumbed quickly in the storm. However, no definitive evidence of grounding was ever found. Controversy and debate. The Coast Guard's official report in 1977 concluded the most likely cause was flooding from faulty cargo hatches. The National Transportation Safety Board, however, cited possible structural failure. Other experts insist rogue waves played the decisive role. To this day, the debate continues. Every theory fits parts of the evidence, but none explain everything. The human cost beyond the technical debates were the 29 men who perished. They came from towns across the Great Lakes, Duluth, Toledo, Cleveland, and small villages in between. Some were fathers, husbands, sons, men in their prime. Others were young sailors just beginning their careers. For their families, the suddenness of the loss was devastating. With no bodies recovered, their grief had no closure. Memorials were erected across the lakes, their names etched into stone. The tragedy entered folklore, immortalized in song, story, and memory. The legacy of the wreck. The loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald changed shipping on the Great Lakes. Regulations were tightened, stronger hatch covers, better survival suits, improved communication equipment, and stricter weather protocols. The wreck itself has been studied repeatedly. In 1976, a Navy submersible captured the first images. Later expeditions provided more detail, confirming the ship's breakup but not settling the cause. In 1995, divers recovered the ship's bell. It was restored and now rests in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, a solemn memorial to the 29 men who never returned. Each year, on November 10, ceremonies are held to remember them. Bells toll 29 times, once for each life lost. Closing reflection. The story of the Edmund Fitzgerald is one of strength and vulnerability, of technology and nature's fury. She was a giant of her time, the pride of the American side, yet in minutes she was gone, leaving only questions in her wake. Did she fall victim to rogue waves? Did her steel give way? Did water pour through her hatches until she could no longer stay afloat? Until every piece of evidence is known, the mystery endures. The Great Lakes are vast, and their storms unforgiving. Somewhere in the dark waters of Lake Superior, the Fitzgerald rests, silent but not forgotten, a steel tomb guarding the unanswered question, what really happened on that November night? The doomed voyage of the SS Valencia. The ocean is not only a highway of trade and travel, it is also a stage for tragedy. Among the many disasters etched into maritime history, one stands out for its horror and mystery, the wreck of the SS Valencia. A passenger steamer bound for the Pacific Northwest, the Valencia's final voyage in 1906 ended not only in shipwreck, but in chaos, terror, and death. More than 130 people perished on the storm-lashed cliffs of Vancouver Island. Survivors told of haunting scenes, and for decades afterward, sailors whispered of ghostly visions of the doomed ship appearing offshore. The Valencia's story is one of human error, natural fury, and lingering mystery. A steamer of her age, the SS Valencia was launched in 1882 by the William Cramp & Sons Shipbuilding Company in Philadelphia. Originally designed as a coastal passenger liner, she measured 252 feet in length and could carry about 280 passengers along with cargo. With her iron hull, 3 masts, and a single smokestack, she was typical of the hybrid steamships of the late 19th century, vessels that relied on both sail and steam for propulsion. For many years, she operated along the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. By the early 1900s, she was transferred to the Pacific, operated by the Pacific Coast Steamship Company. Though not considered luxurious, she was reliable, serving routes between San Francisco, Seattle, and Alaska. The final voyage on January 20, 1906, the Valencia departed San Francisco bound for Seattle. On board were 108 passengers and 65 crew members. Captain Oscar Johnson commanded the ship. At first, the voyage was routine. But by January 21, the ship encountered thick fog off Cape Mendocino. To save time, the captain decided to steer closer to the coast than usual. It was a decision that would prove fatal. The fog grew thicker. Strong southerly winds and heavy rain soon followed, pushing the Valencia northward faster than estimated. By nightfall, the ship had drifted dangerously close to Vancouver Island. Shortly after midnight on January 22, the Valencia struck a reef near Pachena Point. Her hull ripped open. Water poured in. Within minutes, the ship was mortally wounded. Chaos on the cliffs. The scene that followed was one of horror. The storm was raging. Waves battered the ship against the rocks. In the darkness, passengers screamed as water swept across the decks. Lifeboats were lowered in haste, but most were smashed against the side of the ship or capsized in the surf. Terrified men, women, and children were thrown into the freezing water. Few survived. Survivors later described the chaos: passengers clinging to rigging, families torn apart by waves, lifeboats overcrowded and overturned. The cries of the drowning filled the night. The ship, broken and battered, drifted closer to shore, finally lodging on a reef within sight of the cliffs. From the decks, survivors could see the land, rugged, forested cliffs rising above the surf. Safety lay only a few hundred yards away. Yet between them and the shore was a cauldron of waves, jagged rocks, and deadly current. The ordeal for 36 hours, survivors clung to the wreck. They built makeshift shelters on deck, huddled together against wind and spray. They watched helplessly as lifeboats launched and vanished, swallowed by the surf. Rescue attempts were hampered by weather and terrain. The coastline of western Vancouver Island was, and still is, one of the most treacherous in the world, remote, rugged, with no nearby roads at the time. Local First Nations people and a few fishermen attempted to reach the wreck, but the storm made it nearly impossible. From the cliffs above, some rescuers could see the ship, hear the screams, and watch as people clung to the rigging. But they were powerless to help. On January 24, 2 days after the wreck, a massive wave smashed the Valencia against the reef, breaking her apart. The last survivors were swept into the sea. When the storm cleared, more than 136 people were dead. Only 37 men survived, most of them crew members who had managed to make it ashore in the earliest lifeboats. No women or children survived. Aftermath and horror. The Valencia disaster shocked the public. Newspapers called it a tragedy of errors. Critics accused the captain of poor navigation and the company of neglecting safety measures. But what haunted the public most were the eyewitness accounts. Survivors described desperate scenes, mothers clutching infants, swept into the sea. Passengers singing hymns in the rigging as waves closed in. Entire lifeboats vanishing in the surf before rescuers' eyes. For the families of the dead, grief was compounded by horror. The Valencia was not just lost at sea, she was lost within sight of land. Theories of the disaster. Several explanations have been put forward to understand the Valencia tragedy. 1. Navigational error. The official inquiry concluded that the primary cause was navigational error. In the fog off Cape Mendocino, the captain misjudged his position. Believing he was farther offshore, he continued north at full steam. By the time he realized the danger, it was too late. 2. Poor safety procedures. Testimony revealed that the ship's lifeboats were poorly handled. Crew members were inadequately trained, and in the panic, lifeboats were overloaded or improperly launched. Out of 6 lifeboats lowered, only 1 reached shore safely. 3. weather and location. The west coast of Vancouver Island is often called the graveyard of the Pacific. With its strong currents, hidden reefs, and relentless storms, it has claimed hundreds of ships. Even without human error, the conditions may have doomed the Valencia once she strayed too close to shore. The ghost ship legends. The Valencia story did not end with the wreck. Over the decades, sailors and villagers reported eerie sightings along the coast. In 1910, for years after the disaster, fishermen claimed to have seen a phantom ship near Pachena Point, a vessel battered, broken, with figures clinging to its rigging, just as the Valencia had appeared in her final hours. Others swore they saw lifeboats adrift with ghostly passengers, or heard cries in the night carried over the waves. One of the strangest tales came in 1933, when a lifeboat from the Valencia, perfectly preserved, was discovered floating near Barkley Sound, 27 years after the wreck. It had remained intact, a silent relic of the disaster. These stories earned the Valencia a reputation as one of the Pacific's most famous ghost ships. Legacy. The tragedy of the Valencia had lasting consequences. Public outrage led to demands for improved safety measures on the graveyard of the Pacific. In response, the Canadian government constructed a series of lighthouses along Vancouver Island's coast, including the Pachena Point Lighthouse, completed in 1907. A lifeboat station and better rescue infrastructure soon followed. The disaster also influenced maritime policy, highlighting the need for better training in lifeboat procedures and stricter navigational standards. But beyond reforms, the Valencia's legacy is one of haunting memory. Memorials were erected to honor the dead. For the families, however, no monument could erase the horror of how their loved ones died. Closing reflection. The wreck of the SS Valencia is remembered not only for its scale, but for its sheer human tragedy. More than 100 people, trapped within sight of land, watched death approach in wave after wave. Their cries echoed across the cliffs, unheard by the world beyond. What doomed the Valencia? Was it fog and error? Was it panic and poor preparation? Or was it simply the merciless power of the sea? The answers lie beneath the waves off Vancouver Island, where the wreck rests to this day, silent, broken, and surrounded by legends of ghosts. The Valencia remains a warning, that even in sight of safety, the sea can still claim all. The sinking of the HMS Bounty, 2012. The name HMS Bounty carries a legendary weight. The original Royal Navy vessel, launched in 1784, became immortal through the infamous mutiny led by Fletcher Christian against Captain William Bligh. For centuries, the story has been retold in books, theater, and film. But in October 2012, a replica of that same ship, built for Hollywood, but lovingly maintained as a working tall ship, met a tragic fate at sea. She sailed straight into the path of Hurricane Sandy, and like her namesake, she was lost to history. 2 lives were claimed, and once again, the Bounty's name was written into maritime lore. A ship reborn. The replica HMS Bounty was built in 1960 at the Lunenburg Foundry in Nova Scotia. Commissioned for MGM Studios, she was designed specifically for the film Mutiny on the Bounty, 1962, starring Marlon Brando. Unlike many film props, the replica was no mere stage piece. She was a fully functioning tall ship, 180 feet long, rigged with 3 masts, and capable of sailing the open ocean. After filming, she was preserved, later used in Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and became a popular attraction at tall ship festivals worldwide. Over the decades, she carried not just tourists, but also a legacy. Wherever she went, she brought history to life, sails billowing, decks creaking, a ghost of the 18th century gliding through modern seas. The final voyage in October 2012, the replica Bounty was docked in New London, Connecticut. When forecasts warned of Hurricane Sandy, one of the largest and most dangerous storms ever recorded in the Atlantic, most ships sought safe harbor. But Captain Robin Walbridge made a fateful decision. Rather than remain in port, where he feared the ship might be trapped and battered against the docks, he chose to sail east, hoping to skirt the storm at sea. On October 25, the Bounty departed with 16 crew members aboard. Her destination was Florida. The captain believed that by heading into open water, the ship could ride out the storm more safely. It was a gamble, one that would prove deadly. Into the storm at first, the ship made steady progress. But as Hurricane Sandy churned northward, its massive wind field expanded, swallowing the Atlantic. The storm stretched nearly 1,000 miles across, leaving little room to escape. By October 28, the Bounty was caught in deteriorating conditions. Winds rose above 70 knots. Seas towered more than 20 feet, some reports later estimating waves of 30 feet or more. The aging wooden ship struggled. Pumps worked constantly to keep seawater from flooding her hull. Crew members, drenched and exhausted, battled to secure sails and lines. By the early morning of October 29, the Bounty's engines failed. Without power, she could no longer maneuver effectively. Seawater poured through her seams faster than the crew could pump. The ship began to list dangerously. The abandoned ship order at dawn, with the vessel taking on too much water, Captain Walbridge gave the order, "Abandon ship." The crew donned immersion suits and life jackets, scrambling into two open lifeboats as waves crashed over the decks. In the chaos, some were swept into the sea. The Coast Guard, alerted by distress signals, launched a daring rescue operation. A C-130 aircraft located the scene, and helicopters were dispatched, fighting hurricane winds to reach the survivors. In one of the most dramatic rescues in modern maritime history, Coast Guard swimmers hoisted 14 crew members from the raging seas to safety. But 2 lives were lost. The victims, Claudine Christian, a 42-year-old deckhand and distant relative of Fletcher Christian, the very mutineer whose rebellion made the original Bounty famous, was found unresponsive in the water. She could not be revived. Captain Robin Walbridge, aged 63, was never found. Despite extensive searches, his body was lost to the Atlantic. Their deaths added a haunting symmetry to the Bounty's story. A descendant of the mutineer, and the captain of the replica, both claimed by the sea. The wreck hours after the rescue, the HMS Bounty slipped beneath the waves, about 90 miles southeast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, a region sailors call the "graveyard of the Atlantic" for its countless shipwrecks. The ship that had carried Hollywood stars, thrilled festival crowds, and embodied history for half a century now rested on the ocean floor, broken and silent. Investigations and controversy. The loss of the Bounty sparked intense debate. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the U.S. Coast Guard conducted investigations into the sinking. Their findings were sobering: the ship was in poor condition. Despite maintenance, her wooden hull leaked chronically. Crew often pumped thousands of gallons of water per day, even in fair weather. The decision to sail into the path of a known hurricane was widely criticized as reckless. The storm's size made avoidance nearly impossible. The crew, though dedicated, faced an overwhelming situation with limited resources. The official reports concluded that the sinking was preventable. Had the Bounty remained in port, she might have survived. Symbolism and legacy. The loss of the replica Bounty carried a symbolism far beyond her physical wreck. The original HMS Bounty had become legendary for the mutiny of 1789, a story of leadership, defiance, and tragedy. Now, more than 2 centuries later, her replica carried echoes of the same fate: controversy over leadership, loss at sea, and lives cut short. For maritime historians, the event underscored the dangers of sailing aging wooden ships in modern times. For the public, it was a reminder that even in the 21st century, the sea still holds dominion over human ambition. The ship's memory lives on in documentaries, news reports, and maritime museums. Artifacts recovered before her final voyage remain on display, while her story continues to be told at tall ship gatherings and in maritime lore. Closing reflection. The sinking of the HMS Bounty replica in 2012 was more than just the loss of a ship. It was the loss of a living piece of history, a vessel that carried the romance and peril of the age of sail into the modern world. Why did she go down? Was it hubris in facing a storm too great? Was it the decay of age, hidden in her timbers? Or was it simply fate, a cruel reminder that the sea does not bend to human narratives, even those of ships already steeped in legend. The replica Bounty rests now in the Atlantic's graveyard, alongside thousands of other lost vessels. Her timbers may be gone, but her story endures, a cautionary tale of risk, responsibility, and the enduring power of the sea. Like her namesake, the Bounty's end ensures she will never be forgotten. The disappearance of HMS Stonehenge. The ocean floor is a vast graveyard of ships and submarines, some discovered, others still shrouded in darkness. Among the most haunting mysteries of the Second World War is the disappearance of HMS Stonehenge, a British submarine that vanished without a trace in early 1944. No wreck has ever been conclusively found. No survivors returned. And to this day, her fate remains one of the Royal Navy's enduring enigmas. A wartime submarine. HMS Stonehenge was an S-class submarine, a design originally created for operations in the confined waters of the North Sea. By the 1940s, however, many of these boats were adapted for service in the Far East. Laid down in 1941 and launched in 1942, Stonehenge was part of the third group of the S-class, slightly larger and more capable than their predecessors. Measuring about 217 feet in length, with a displacement of 990 tons surfaced and 1,250 tons submerged, she carried a crew of around 48 men. Armed with 6 forward torpedo tubes, a 3-inch deck gun, and a 20mm Oerlikon cannon, she was built for stealth and sudden attack. By 1944, these submarines were an essential part of Britain's effort to strangle Japanese shipping in the Indian Ocean. Early service. After commissioning, HMS Stonehenge was sent east to join the Eastern Fleet, operating out of Trincomalee in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. In 1943, she carried out several patrols in the Indian Ocean, hunting Japanese merchant ships and escort vessels. Like many submarines of her class, her work was dangerous but often unseen. Submariners called it silent service, long weeks in cramped quarters, stalking targets, striking, then slipping away. By the end of 1943, Stonehenge was considered a reliable asset. Her crew was experienced, her systems proven. When she left on her next patrol, no one expected it to be her last. The final voyage on February 25, 1944, HMS Stonehenge departed from Trincomalee. Her orders were clear: proceed to a patrol area off the west coast of Sumatra, part of modern Indonesia. Japanese supply lines were vulnerable there, and British submarines were making steady efforts to disrupt them. Her patrol was scheduled to last until March 20, 1944. After that, she was due to report back to base. But Stonehenge never returned. Silence. No signals were received after her departure. No sightings were reported. When she failed to arrive back in port, she was declared overdue and presumed lost. All 48 men aboard were gone. The silence surrounding her disappearance was chilling. Other submarines had at least sent last messages, distress calls, or been spotted by enemy records. The Stonehenge, by contrast, simply vanished. Possible explanations. Over the decades, historians and naval experts have proposed several theories to explain the loss of HMS Stonehenge. None are conclusive, but each sheds light on the dangers submarines faced in wartime. 1. Enemy mines. One of the most likely explanations is that Stonehenge struck a minefield off the coast of Sumatra. Japanese defensive minefields were known to exist in the area, especially around approaches to ports and shipping lanes. A mine strike would have been sudden and catastrophic. The submarine could have been destroyed instantly, giving the crew no chance to escape or signal. The lack of wreckage or survivors is consistent with this scenario. 2. Enemy depth charges. Another possibility is that she was detected and destroyed by Japanese anti-submarine forces. Records from Japanese warships and aircraft show frequent encounters with Allied submarines in early 1944. However, no confirmed Japanese claims match the loss of Stonehenge. In fact, Japanese post-war records do not list her as a known kill, which casts doubt on this theory. 3. Mechanical failure. Submarines of the S-class, though dependable, were not immune to mechanical failure. Battery explosions, flooding from faulty hatches, or even structural weakness under depth pressure could doom a submarine without enemy action. If Stonehenge suffered such a failure while submerged, she could have sunk without trace. Again, the suddenness and absence of signals would fit this explanation. 4. Navigational error. Operating in shallow, reef-studded waters off Sumatra carried risks. A simple navigational mistake could have grounded the submarine or caused her to strike an uncharted hazard. If this occurred in stormy weather, the submarine may have been lost before her crew could take corrective action. Patterns of loss. The disappearance of HMS Stonehenge was part of a wider tragedy. The Royal Navy lost over 70 submarines during World War II. In the Indian and Pacific Oceans, conditions were particularly unforgiving. Monsoon weather, tropical currents, and vigilant Japanese patrols made every voyage perilous. Other British submarines, such as HMS Regulus, HMS Tigris, and HMS Sahib, were also lost without clear explanation. The Stonehenge was one of many that vanished into the depths, leaving behind only speculation. The human cost behind the statistics were the 48 men of her crew. Officers, engineers, and young sailors, many in their 20s, who had left families and loved ones behind. For their relatives, the lack of answers was a wound that never fully healed. Unlike surface ships, submarines rarely left survivors. A sinking was almost always total, the submarine becoming both a grave and a prison. Families received only a telegram, missing, presumed killed in action. For those left behind, the Atlanta-like silence was unbearable. No graves to visit, no wreck to honor, just names on memorials, such as the Royal Navy Submarine Memorial in Gosport. Modern searches. In recent years, interest in locating the wreck of HMS Stonehenge has grown. Advances in sonar and deep-sea exploration have made it possible to scan large areas of the seabed. In 2011, reports surfaced that a wreck had been found off Sumatra that might be the Stonehenge. However, subsequent investigations could not confirm the identity. Other discoveries in the region have turned out to be merchant vessels or Japanese craft. To this day, the precise location of Stonehenge remains unknown. Legacy. The loss of HMS Stonehenge is a reminder of the peril faced by submariners during World War II. Operating in silence, often alone for weeks, they fought an invisible war beneath the waves. Many never returned. The submarine's disappearance also underscores the vastness of the sea. Even with modern technology, entire vessels, steel giants with dozens of men, can vanish into the deep, their resting places hidden from human eyes for generations. Among submariners, there is a saying, a submarine has two crews, the one that sails her, and the one that waits at home. For the Stonehenge, both crews were bound by silence, one beneath the sea, the other left behind on land. Closing reflection. The disappearance of HMS Stonehenge is more than just a wartime statistic. It is a story of bravery, sacrifice, and mystery. A submarine that slipped beneath the waves and never returned, a crew whose fate remains unknown. Did she strike a mine? Did machinery fail? Did an unseen enemy claim her? Or does she lie still, intact, somewhere off the coast of Sumatra, her secrets preserved in silence? Until her wreck is found, HMS Stonehenge remains a ghost of the sea, a reminder that even in war, some stories end not with answers, but with questions. The ocean holds her secret still. And somewhere in the dark waters of the Indian Ocean, HMS Stonehenge rests, silent, waiting, and remembered. The mystery of Donald Crowhurst and the Tinmouth Electron. The sea tests every sailor who dares to challenge it. It rewards skill, punishes arrogance, and often demands more than a man can give. In 1968, one amateur sailor, Donald Crowhurst, set out to conquer the oceans in a daring race around the world. He never returned. What began as a quest for glory ended in tragedy, deception, and mystery. His boat, the Tinmouth Electron, was found adrift in the Atlantic, abandoned. His logbooks revealed a descent into lies, despair, and madness. To this day, his story raises unsettling questions: what truly happened out there? The race in the late 1960s, the world was gripped by adventure. Mount Everest had been climbed, the moon was within reach, and now sailors dreamed of circling the globe alone, without stopping. In 1968, the Sunday Times announced the Golden Globe race, the first non-stop, single-handed, round-the-world yacht race. The rules were simple: set sail from England, sail alone around the three Great Capes, Good Hope, Lewin, and Horn, and return without ever touching land. The prize, fame, fortune, and £5,000 for the fastest man. Among the entrants were seasoned sailors, Francis Chichester, Robin Knox Johnston, Bernard Moitessier. And then there was Donald Crowhurst. The man Crowhurst was no hardened mariner. He was an engineer, an inventor, and a weekend sailor. Charismatic but restless, he dreamed of making his mark on the world. The race offered him that chance. But there was a problem. His boat, a trimaran he named the Teignmouth Electron, was untested for such a voyage. His finances were precarious. To fund his entry, he mortgaged his business and signed a contract with sponsors. If he failed to finish, he faced financial ruin. For Crowhurst, success was not only about pride, it was survival. The departure on October 31, 1968, the Teignmouth Electron set sail from Teignmouth, Devon. Crowhurst waved to crowds, projecting confidence. But privately, he was terrified. His boat had mechanical issues from the start. His navigation equipment was incomplete. He was leaving months later than most of his competitors, already at a disadvantage. Within weeks, the problems mounted. The trimaran leaked. His self-steering gear failed. His radio communications faltered. Crowhurst realized that to continue into the Southern Ocean, one of the most brutal stretches of water on Earth, would be suicide. But to turn back would mean financial disaster and humiliation. The deception faced with an impossible choice, Crowhurst devised a desperate plan. He would fake his voyage. Instead of continuing into the Southern Ocean, he remained in the South Atlantic, drifting and sailing small loops while sending back false reports of progress. Using his skills as an engineer, he carefully falsified his logbooks to make it appear as though he was circumnavigating the globe. His plan was to rejoin the race near its end, slip back into the North Atlantic, and return to England as if he had completed the full journey. For months, the deception worked. Sponsors hailed his progress. Newspapers printed glowing reports of his position. Unbeknownst to them, Crowhurst was spiraling deeper into deceit. The twist of fate as the race neared its end, something happened Crowhurst had not foreseen. Other competitors dropped out, crippled by storms or exhaustion. One sailor, Robin Knox Johnston, pressed steadily on, eventually completing the first-ever non-stop solo circumnavigation. But because the race also offered a prize for the fastest time, Crowhurst, with his false reports, now appeared to be in contention. Suddenly, his harmless deception threatened to become exposure. If he returned to England as the fastest, his logs would face intense scrutiny. His fraud would be uncovered. The walls of his lie were closing in. The breakdown in June 1969, the Teignmouth Electron drifted in the mid-Atlantic. Crowhurst's logbooks from this time reveal a collapse of both mind and spirit. His entries shifted from navigation to philosophy, then to rambling, almost mystical reflections. He wrote of time, space, and cosmic unity. Some pages descended into incoherent scrawls. It was as if isolation and pressure had broken his grip on reality. On June 29, 1969, his final log entry was made. The handwriting was erratic, the thoughts fragmented. After that, silence. The discovery on July 10, 1969, a search vessel spotted the Teignmouth Electron adrift and abandoned in the Atlantic, about 1,000 miles west of the Azores. There was no sign of Crowhurst. The boat was intact, her supplies still on board. His logbooks were recovered, revealing the deception, the false navigation, and the psychological unraveling of the man who had once dreamed of glory. It was concluded that Donald Crowhurst had likely stepped overboard, a deliberate suicide born of despair. His body was never found. The story of Donald Crowhurst has fascinated historians, sailors, and psychologists for decades. Several theories attempt to explain his final fate. 1. Suicide by drowning. The most widely accepted explanation is that Crowhurst, overwhelmed by the exposure of his fraud and crushed by despair, deliberately walked off the deck into the Atlantic. His final log entries suggest a mind unraveling under unbearable pressure. 2. Accidental drowning. Some argue that Crowhurst may not have intended to die. He could have slipped while repairing his boat or been washed overboard in rough seas. Alone, with no one to save him, even a minor accident would have been fatal. 3. Mental collapse and delusion. The tone of his last writing suggests he may have entered a state of psychosis. Some believe he no longer distinguished reality from imagination, and that his death was the result of a delusional act, perhaps believing he was transcending earthly existence. The legacy of the Tinmouth Electron. The Tinmouth Electron herself became a symbol of this tragedy. After the search, she was towed to the Caribbean and eventually abandoned. For decades, her decaying hull sat on the shore of Cayman Brac, slowly rotting under the tropical sun. Visitors who stumbled upon her remains felt they were in the presence of a ghost, a relic of one man's ambition and downfall. Today, fragments of the boat have been preserved by museums, but her story is inseparable from Crowhurst's, a monument not to victory, but to human vulnerability. Reflections. The story of Donald Crowhurst is unlike other maritime mysteries. The wreck was found. The logbooks recovered. We know much of what happened. And yet, the mystery remains. What drove him to deception? What went through his mind as he drifted alone, carrying the weight of a lie too heavy to bear? Did he intend to die, or was it chance that claimed him? His tale is both cautionary and tragic. It reminds us of the immense psychological toll of solitude at sea, of the dangers of pride and desperation, and of the fine line between ambition and catastrophe. Closing. The Golden Globe race of 1968 produced heroes and legends, Robin Knox Johnston, who became the first man to sail non-stop around the world, and Bernard Moitessier, who abandoned the race to save his soul, sailing on into the Pacific. But it is Donald Crowhurst, the man who cheated, broke, and disappeared, whose story lingers longest. The Tinmouth Electron drifts now only in memory, her timbers scattered, her sails long gone. But in every telling of Crowhurst's tale, she sails again, a ghost ship not of the sea, but of the human mind, reminding us that the greatest storms are often within. The sinking of the MV Derbyshire. The sea is vast and merciless. Even in the modern age of steel and radar, ships vanish into its depths, leaving only silence in their wake. Among the most devastating maritime disasters of the late 20th century was the loss of the MV Derbyshire, a British bulk carrier that disappeared in 1980 during a typhoon south of Japan. She was the largest British ship ever lost at sea. All 44 people on board perished. For decades, her fate was shrouded in mystery, until investigators, after years of searching, uncovered a hidden chain of events that revealed not only why she sank, but how her tragedy reshaped global shipping safety. A giant of her class, the Derbyshire was launched in 1976, built by Swan Hunter shipbuilders in the UK. She was a member of the Bridge-class bulk carriers, immense vessels designed to carry raw materials across the world. Length, 294 meters, 965 feet. Beam, 44 meters, 144 feet. Deadweight tonnage, 169,000 tons. She was built for the Bibby Line and named after the English county of Derbyshire. Her sheer size and steel strength represented the peak of British shipbuilding at the time. The Derbyshire carried ore, coal, and other bulk cargoes on the long route between Europe and Asia. Despite her enormous size, she had a relatively small crew, just 42 men and women, along with 2 spouses of crew members on her final voyage. The final voyage on July 11, 1980, the Derbyshire left Canada carrying 157,000 tons of iron ore concentrate bound for Japan. Her route took her across the Pacific during typhoon season, a calculated risk for all ships in those waters. By early September, as she neared Japan, the weather worsened. A tropical depression had grown into Typhoon Orchid, one of the most powerful storms of the season. On September 9, 1980, radio contact with the Derbyshire was lost. She had been sailing about 230 miles south of Okinawa. She never arrived in Japan. No distress call was sent. No lifeboats or survivors were found. For days, the sea yielded nothing. Eventually, fragments of wreckage and a single lifebuoy were spotted, grim confirmation that the ship had gone down. All 44 lives were lost. Silence and shock. The loss stunned Britain. The Derbyshire had been considered unsinkable, a massive, modern bulk carrier built to the highest standards. How could a ship of her size vanish so completely? Without survivors or wreckage, no answers emerged. Official reports at the time concluded only that she had likely succumbed to the violence of Typhoon Orchid. But this explanation did not satisfy families of the crew. They believed something more fundamental had gone wrong, a flaw in design or construction that doomed the ship before the storm struck. For years, they campaigned for answers. Theories of the loss. Several theories were put forward to explain the sudden disappearance of the Derbyshire. 1. Overwhelmed by the typhoon. The simplest theory was that Typhoon Orchid's 150 miles per hour winds and 40-foot waves had simply overwhelmed the ship. Even the largest vessels are vulnerable in the face of nature's fury. But critics noted that bulk carriers of similar size had survived equal or worse storms. Why had the Derbyshire succumbed so quickly, without even sending a distress call? 2. Structural weakness. Some maritime experts suggested that her massive steel hull may have had weaknesses. The bridge-class design was relatively new, and questions arose about whether stresses from heavy cargo or wave action could have caused catastrophic failure. If her hull cracked under strain, flooding could have sunk her in minutes. 3. Hatch cover failure. Another theory centered on her cargo hatch covers. These were the huge steel panels sealing her holds. If waves tore them open, seawater could have flooded the cargo spaces. With iron or concentrate inside, even a small amount of flooding could cause the cargo to liquefy, destabilizing the ship and pulling her under. This theory gained traction in later years, and eventually proved decisive. The families fight for years. The families of the lost crew refused to accept official silence. Led by the Derbyshire Family Association, they demanded deeper investigation. They argued that a design flaw had doomed their loved ones, and that without answers, other ships were at risk. Their campaign lasted more than a decade, fueled by grief but also determination. Finally, in the 1990s, international pressure mounted for a new inquiry. The wreck is found in 1994. An expedition funded by unions and the International Transport Workers Federation located the wreck of the Derbyshire. Using sonar and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, they mapped the seabed 4,200 meters, 14,000 feet, below the surface. The discovery was stunning. The ship lay in two major sections, separated by nearly a mile of seabed. The bow was smashed, the stern twisted. Debris was scattered across a wide field. Most telling of all, the cargo hatch covers were missing or destroyed. This evidence pointed toward a catastrophic sequence. Waves had torn the hatch covers from the ship, allowing the sea to rush into the holds. Once the cargo was flooded, the Derbyshire sank rapidly. The final inquiry armed with this new evidence, a formal inquiry reopened in 2000. After analyzing the wreck and storm data, investigators concluded, the Derbyshire had encountered rogue waves over 80 feet high during Typhoon Orchid. These waves smashed the forward ventilators and hatch covers. Once water entered the cargo holds, the immense weight of the ore caused a chain reaction of flooding. Within minutes, the ship broke apart and sank. The inquiry declared that the loss was not simply an act of God. It was the result of design vulnerabilities in bulk carriers, particularly weak hatch covers that could not withstand extreme conditions. Lessons and reforms. The tragedy of the Derbyshire changed international shipping safety. New regulations were introduced, stronger standards for hatch cover construction. Improved inspection protocols for bulk carriers. Greater emphasis on understanding how cargo like or can liquefy when wet. The disaster became a catalyst for reform, saving countless lives in the decades since. The human cost but beyond design flaws and regulations were the 44 people who died, officers, crewmen, and 2 wives sailing with their husbands. Their lives ended in terror, trapped in a ship succumbing to the sea. For their families, the loss was compounded by years of uncertainty, of fighting for recognition, of demanding the truth. When the inquiry finally delivered its verdict, it was not closure, but it was justice of a kind. Their loved ones had not been lost to chance alone. They had been victims of a preventable flaw. Closing reflection. The loss of the MV Derbyshire is one of the great maritime tragedies of the modern age. A ship thought unsinkable, gone without warning. A silence that lasted for decades. And finally, the truth, uncovered only through persistence and courage of the families who refused to let their story be forgotten. Her sinking reminds us that even in an age of steel and engineering, the sea remains a force beyond control. It also shows that vigilance and accountability are essential, for safety at sea is never finished, it is always learned, often at terrible cost. Somewhere in the depths south of Japan, the Derbyshire still lies, silent, broken, and vast. She is a grave, a warning, and a reminder that the ocean never gives up its secrets easily. The ghost ship of Lake Superior, SS Kamloops. The Great Lakes are often called inland seas, vast waters that can be as deadly as any ocean. Over the centuries, thousands of ships have vanished beneath their waves. But among them, few stories are as haunting as that of the SS Kamloops. She was a small Canadian freighter, lost in a fierce storm on Lake Superior in 1927. For decades she lay undiscovered, her crew entombed in silence. When divers finally located her wreck in the 1970s, they found not only a perfectly preserved ghost ship, but also one of the most unsettling underwater scenes in maritime history. The ship the Kamloops was launched in 1924, built by Furnace Shipbuilding in England. She was designed as a package freighter, smaller than the giant or carriers of the lakes, but vital for carrying mixed cargo to remote communities. Length, 250 feet, 76 meters, beam, 43 feet, 13 meters, gross tonnage, 2,402 tons. She was sturdy but compact, able to navigate both the Great Lakes and smaller northern ports. By 1927, she was operated by the Canada Steamship Lines, hauling goods between cities like Fort William, Port Arthur, and smaller Lake Superior harbors. Her final cargo was typical: farm machinery, shoes, candy, barrels of syrup, clothing, and general supplies. But the Lake Superior she sailed into that December was far from typical. The final voyage on December 5, 1927, the Kamloops departed from Port Arthur, Ontario. Her destination, Isle Royale, a rugged island in the northwest of Lake Superior, then onward to smaller ports. Aboard were 22 crew members. The weather at departure was already treacherous. Storm warnings crackled across wireless sets, strong winds, snow squalls, plunging temperatures. But time was money, and captains often sailed despite the risks. As the Kamloops pushed eastward into Lake Superior, the storm intensified. Winds screamed across the lake, waves rose like walls, snow fell in blinding sheets. By December 6, the ship was in grave danger. Her last known sighting was by the steamer K-Doc, which reported seeing the Kamloops laboring heavily in the storm near Isle Royale. After that, she vanished. Search and silence. When the storm cleared, the Kamloops failed to arrive at any port. Searchers scoured the waters around Isle Royale. Weeks later, bodies of several crew members were found washed ashore, frozen in the snow. They had clearly abandoned ship and tried to reach land, but none survived the island's brutal winter. The ship herself was nowhere to be found. For decades, the Kamloops remained one of Lake Superior's most enduring mysteries. Had she capsized? Broken apart? Where did she lie in the lake's deep, cold waters? The discovery in 1977, nearly 50 years after her disappearance, a team of divers finally located the wreck. They found her off Isle Royale's north shore, lying upright in about 260 feet, 79 meters, of water. The cold, fresh depths of Lake Superior had preserved her with eerie clarity. Her hull was intact, her masts still standing, her cargo scattered across the lakebed. It was like stepping back into 1927. Inside, her cargo was astonishingly preserved, shoes neatly stacked, cases of candy still wrapped, farm equipment resting quietly. It was as though the ship had just been loaded and sent on her way. But what unsettled divers most was not the ship, but what, or who, they found inside. Old Whitey, among the wreckage, divers discovered human remains. In the frigid, oxygen-poor depths of Lake Superior, bodies do not decompose as they do in warmer waters. Instead, they are preserved in waxy form, their skin turned ghostly white. One body, believed to be that of a crewman, was found floating near the stern companionway, drifting gently in the currents. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his clothes still intact. Divers nicknamed him Old Whitey. Sometimes, they reported, he seemed to follow them as they swam through the wreck, a silent guardian of the Kamloops. Out of respect, divers never disturbed him. To this day, he remains with the ship, one of the most haunting underwater presences ever encountered. Theories of the sinking the Kamloops was found, but why she sank remains uncertain. Several theories attempt to explain her sudden loss. 1. Overwhelmed by the storm. The simplest explanation is that she was simply overpowered by the blizzard. Her smaller size compared to massive ore carriers made her more vulnerable. The storm of December 1927 was severe even by superior standards. Waves, ice accumulation, and shifting cargo may have doomed her. 2. Cargo shift. The Kamloops carried mixed cargo, heavy machinery alongside lighter goods. If her cargo shifted in the storm, it could have destabilized her. A sudden list in high seas might have flooded her holds or rolled her over. 3. Mechanical failure. Some experts believe she may have suffered an engine or steering failure. Trapped in a blizzard with no control, she could have drifted onto rocks or simply foundered. 4. Icing. One of the deadliest hazards on the Great Lakes is icing. In freezing storms, spray can encase a ship in tons of ice, raising her center of gravity until she capsizes. If the Kamloops iced over, she may have rolled suddenly into the lake. Legacy. The sinking of the Kamloops claimed all 22 souls aboard. For their families, the tragedy was compounded by the decades of silence before the wreck was found. Only when divers located her in 1977 did the final chapter close, and even then, mysteries remained. The wreck today is protected within Isle Royale National Park. Only experienced technical divers visit, given the depth and cold. Many who do describe the site as one of the most haunting shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Artifacts, shoes, machinery, candy tins, still lie scattered, frozen in time. And in the shadows, Old Whitey drifts quietly, a ghostly reminder of the crew who never came home. Reflection. The SS Kamloops is not the largest or most famous wreck of Lake Superior. But she is among the most unforgettable. Her story combines every element of a maritime mystery, a sudden disappearance, decades of silence, and a chilling discovery beneath the waves. What doomed her? Was it storm, ice, or cargo? Why did some of her crew make it ashore only to perish in the snow? And why does her preserved ghostly guardian remain, still drifting through her passageways? The answers may never be known. But the Kamloops endures, a time capsule, a grave, and a legend of the Great Lakes. Closing. Lake Superior has long been called the graveyard of ships. The Edmund Fitzgerald, the Cypress, the Emperor, all lie in her depths. But none carry the same spectral weight as the Kamloops. In the cold silence beneath Isle Royale, she waits still, her decks loaded, her guardian watching. A reminder that the lake does not give back what it takes, except in whispers and shadows. The SS Kamloops remains a ghost ship not of myth, but of chilling reality. The wreck of the SS Emperor. Lake Superior is a place of beauty and danger. Its waters are clear, cold, and unforgiving, a graveyard for hundreds of ships. Among them lies the SS Emperor, a Canadian freighter whose sudden sinking in 1947 remains one of the lake's darkest maritime tragedies. In the middle of the night, with no storm raging and no enemy near, she struck rocks and went down in minutes. Nearly half her crew perished. To this day, questions remain about how such a catastrophe could happen in calm conditions, and why her captain made the choices he did. The ship the Emperor was launched in 1910 by the Collingwood Shipbuilding Company in Ontario, Canada. She was built for the Canadian steamship lines, part of a growing fleet of bulk carriers designed to haul iron ore, coal, and grain across the Great Lakes. Length, 525 feet, 160 meters, beam, 56 feet, 17 meters, gross tonnage, 7,031 tons. For nearly 4 decades, she carried cargo across the inland seas. She was sturdy, dependable, and well regarded by her crews. By 1947, though aging, she remained a vital link in the iron ore trade between Minnesota and Ontario. The final voyage on June 3, 1947, the Emperor departed Port Arthur, Ontario, now part of Thunder Bay, loaded with over 10,000 tons of iron ore. Her destination, steel mills on Lake Erie. Aboard were 46 crew members, led by Captain William Bryan. Conditions were calm. The lake was clear. There was nothing to suggest disaster. But in the early hours of June 4, 1947, tragedy struck. The collision at around 4:15 a.m., the Emperor steamed through the waters of northern Lake Superior near Isle Royale, a rugged island chain notorious for hidden reefs. Suddenly, with no warning, she slammed into Shoal Point Reef at full speed. The impact ripped open her steel hull. Water flooded in. Within minutes, the massive freighter was sinking. Crew members scrambled in chaos. Some were thrown from their bunks. Others rushed to lifeboats, but the ship listed sharply, making launches nearly impossible. The night was black, the cold water unforgiving. In less than half an hour, the Emperor was gone. The survivors and the lost rescue vessels rushed from Isle Royale and nearby ports, alerted by distress flares. Survivors were pulled from lifeboats and the frigid waters. But 12 officers and 7 crewmen, 21 men in total, were lost. Most were trapped in their quarters as the ship flooded. A few were seen clinging to wreckage before succumbing to hypothermia. The survivors were taken ashore to recover. Shock and grief rippled through their communities. Families demanded answers. How had a ship as experienced as the Emperor, in calm weather and clear conditions, struck a well-charted reef? Theories of the sinking. Several explanations have been put forward over the years. 1. Navigational error. The official inquiry concluded that human error was to blame. The Emperor had been on autopilot, and officers on watch may not have been paying close enough attention. Fatigue was also cited. Many crewmen had been on long shifts with little rest. When the reef appeared on the horizon, it was too late. 2. Overconfidence. Some historians believe the crew may have been overconfident. After nearly 40 years on the lakes, the Emperor was seen as reliable. Perhaps her officers underestimated the danger of Isle Royale's reefs, assuming they could sail through without careful navigation. 3. Mechanical failure. Others speculate that a steering or compass failure might have played a role. If her navigational equipment malfunctioned, even briefly, she could have drifted fatally off course. However, no evidence was found to confirm this. The wreck. The Emperor came to rest in deep, cold water off Isle Royale. Her bow is embedded in the reef, her stern trailing into deeper water at nearly 270 feet. Because Lake Superior's waters are so cold and clear, the wreck is remarkably well preserved. Divers who visit today describe a haunting sight. Her cargo hold still full of rusting ore. Cabins and passageways intact, though eerie. Machinery rooms frozen in time. Even more unsettling, divers have reported seeing remains of crew members, preserved by the lake's icy depths. Out of respect, most divers avoid disturbing them, acknowledging the wreck as both an artifact and a grave. Legacy and memory. The loss of the Emperor was one of the deadliest peacetime disasters on Lake Superior since the turn of the century. It reinforced the reputation of Isle Royale as one of the most dangerous areas for navigation on the Great Lakes. The official inquiry blamed fatigue and poor watch-keeping, but for many, the tragedy highlighted the human cost of long hours, relentless schedules, and the pressure to keep cargoes moving at any cost. Today, the wreck lies within Isle Royale National Park, protected under U.S. law. It has become a popular but challenging dive site, drawing technical divers from around the world. But it is also hallowed ground, a steel tomb for the men who never returned. Closing reflection. The story of the SS Emperor is one of sudden tragedy. She did not sink in a storm. She was not claimed by ice or fire. Instead, she was lost in calm conditions, undone by a single mistake in the dead of night. Why did it happen? Fatigue? Overconfidence? A moment of distraction? We may never know. But the lesson endures. On Lake Superior, the margin for error is always razor thin. The Emperor remains there still, resting on the reef where she struck, her holds full, her cabin silent. A ghost of the Great Lakes, preserved in cold water and memory, reminding us that even in peace, the sea, or the lake, can demand its toll. The wreck of the SS Algoma Lake Superior has always been a place of extremes, a lake of beauty, riches, and sudden death. Sailors call it the graveyard of the Great Lakes, for good reason. Among its countless wrecks, few are as tragic as the loss of the SS Algoma in 1885. She was a proud Canadian steamer, carrying passengers and cargo across the inland seas. But one November morning, she met her end in a violent storm, dashed against the rocks of Isle Royale. More than half of her people perished in the icy waters. Her sinking remains one of the most haunting stories of the Great Lakes. The ship the Algoma was launched in 1883, built at Glasgow, Scotland, for the Canadian Pacific Railway. At the time, the CPR was expanding its operations beyond rail, creating a fleet of steamships to connect their transcontinental railway with Great Lakes ports. Length, 262 feet, 80 meters, beam, 38 feet, 12 meters, tonnage, 1,300 tons. She was part of a trio of sister ships, the Algoma, Athabasca, and Alberta, all designed for passenger and cargo service. With her steel hull, modern steam engines, and elegant passenger accommodations, she represented the cutting edge of Canadian lake transport in the 1880s. The final voyage on November 5, 1885, the Algoma departed Port Arthur, Ontario, now part of Thunder Bay. She carried 37 passengers, 48 crew members, and a heavy load of freight, including barrels, machinery, and railway supplies. At her helm was Captain James Wilson, an experienced sailor with years on the lakes. His orders: deliver passengers and freight to Owen Sound, a key CPR terminal. But November on Lake Superior is perilous. The storms of late autumn are unpredictable and often deadly. Still, the Algoma steamed confidently into the open lake, her passengers enjoying the luxury of her saloons, cabins, and dining room. Into the storm. By the night of November 6, the weather had worsened. Snow squalls swept across the lake, winds rising to gale force. The Algoma plowed eastward, her visibility reduced to near zero. Captain Wilson and his officers tried to hold course, but in the blinding snow, navigation was nearly impossible. Compasses could not account for shifting winds and current. Isle Royale, a long, rocky island notorious for wrecks, loomed unseen in the storm. At 4 a.m. on November 7, the disaster struck. The wreck in the darkness, with waves pounding and snow driving, the Algoma smashed into rocky reefs off Isle Royale's Mott Island. The impact was devastating. Her hull tore open. Water rushed in. Engines failed. Within minutes, the proud steamer was mortally wounded. Passengers and crew scrambled in panic. Lifeboats were lowered, but the storm smashed most to pieces against the hull. Survivors clung to debris, barrels, and wreckage in the freezing surf. Some managed to struggle ashore, crawling onto the icy rocks of Isle Royale. Others were swept away, their cries lost in the storm. By dawn, the Algoma was gone, broken, her cargo scattered along the shore. The survivors of the 85 people aboard, only 16 survived. Most were crewmen who managed to reach land. The survivors endured freezing conditions on Île Royale until they were rescued days later by passing vessels. Exhausted, frostbitten, and grieving, they told harrowing tales of passengers swept overboard, lifeboats smashed, and desperate clinging to wreckage in the black night. The dead numbered 69 men, women, and children, making the Algoma disaster one of the deadliest shipwrecks in Lake Superior's history. Aftermath news of the tragedy spread quickly. Newspapers across Canada and the United States reported the horror of bodies washing ashore, of wreckage scattered for miles along Île Royale's rugged coast. Questions arose: why had the Algoma sailed in such weather? Could the captain have avoided Île Royale's deadly reefs? The official inquiry concluded that the disaster was primarily the result of navigational difficulties in the blizzard. Captain Wilson had misjudged his course in near-zero visibility, driving the ship onto the rocks. But many sailors knew the deeper truth: on Lake Superior in November, even the strongest ship could be lost in minutes. The wreck today: the remains of the Algoma still lie off Île Royale, scattered across the reef and lakebed. Divers have found twisted steel, machinery, and cargo, relics of her final voyage. But like many wrecks in Lake Superior, she is less a tourist site and more a memorial. The frigid water preserves her story, but it is the memory of those lost, passengers bound for new lives, sailors carrying out their duty, that haunts the site. The legacy: the Algoma disaster was a turning point for the Canadian Pacific's Great Lakes Fleet. Her loss, along with other wrecks, underscored the dangers of late-season sailing. In later years, more stringent safety practices and weather monitoring would be adopted. But for the families of those lost, reforms could not ease the grief. Entire households were shattered. Communities mourned fathers, sons, daughters. Many bodies were never recovered, claimed forever by Lake Superior. The Algoma became one more name carved into the long roll call of ships claimed by the graveyard of the Great Lakes. Closing reflection: the story of the SS Algoma is a reminder of how fragile even the strongest vessels are when pitted against Superior's November storms. She was steel and steam, proud and modern, yet she lasted only minutes against rock and wave. Why did she sail into the storm? Was it pressure to keep schedules, overconfidence in her design, or simply fate? We cannot know. But we do know this: on that night in 1885, 69 lives were extinguished in the freezing dark, and the lake claimed another chapter in its long, grim history. Today, the Algoma lies silent, her bones scattered, her story remembered only in whispers of wreckage and the names of the lost. Lake Superior keeps its secrets, but it never forgets. The Ghost Ferry of Lake Michigan, SS Milwaukee. Lake Michigan is a lake of commerce and danger, where ferries once carried trains across its waters, and where storms often turned routine voyages into nightmares. Among its many tragedies, one story has lingered in legend: the loss of the SS Milwaukee in October 1929. She was a sturdy railroad car ferry, built to haul trains across the lake in all conditions. Yet one autumn storm overwhelmed her, sending her and her crew to the bottom. No passengers, no survivors. Only haunting messages in bottles, and the eventual discovery of her wreck told the story of her final hours. The ship, the SS Milwaukee, was launched in 1902, built by the American Shipbuilding Company in Cleveland, Ohio. Length: 338 feet, 103 meters, beam, 56 feet, 17 meters, gross tonnage, 3,137 tons. She was designed as a railroad car ferry, built for the Grand Trunk Milwaukee Car Ferry Company. Her purpose was to transport fully loaded railway cars across Lake Michigan between Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Grand Haven, Michigan. With 4 parallel tracks on her deck, she could carry more than 30 rail cars per trip, loaded with everything from lumber to coal to grain. Her massive steel hull was built for strength, able to cut through ice in winter and endure heavy seas in autumn storms. She had served for 27 years without major incident. By 1929, she was seen as one of the most reliable ferries on the lake. The final voyage on October 22, 1929, the Milwaukee prepared for another routine crossing. Aboard were 27 crewmen and 1 passenger, the company's shore agent. She carried 27 loaded railroad cars, including heavy automobiles and steel. At her helm was Captain Robert "Bob" McKay, a veteran of the lakes. He had guided the ferry through storms before, and on this day, though the weather was deteriorating, he chose to sail. By late afternoon, the winds had risen to gale force, over 50 miles per hour. Waves swelled to more than 20 feet. Still, the Milwaukee pressed onward into the heart of the storm. She was last sighted by the ferry Grand Trunk, struggling through the waves, spray crashing over her decks. After that, she vanished. The silence when the Milwaukee failed to arrive in Grand Haven, concern turned to alarm. Search vessels were dispatched. Soon, grim discoveries were made. Bodies of crewmen began washing ashore, many wearing life jackets. Some clutched personal effects. Among them were messages, hurriedly written notes sealed in bottles or tucked into clothing. These messages offered chilling glimpses into the ferry's final moments. The messages in bottles. One note, found on a crewman's body, read, "This ship is taking water fast. We have turned around to try to make Milwaukee, but it is no use. She is going down." Another, discovered later, carried these words, "The sea is washing over the decks. Our cargo is breaking loose. She is listing badly. This is the end, and we are all prepared." These haunting messages, written as the ferry was sinking, made the Milwaukee unique among Great Lakes wrecks. Rarely had the world heard from a doomed crew in their final hours. What happened to the Milwaukee? For years, speculation surrounded the loss. Why had such a strong ferry failed so suddenly? 1. Shifted cargo. The most likely explanation is that the railroad cars broke free during the storm. Each weighed dozens of tons. If they shifted violently on the tracks, they could have smashed through the ferry's hull or punctured watertight bulkheads, flooding her rapidly. The crew messages mentioning cargo breaking loose support this theory. 2. Overloading. Some historians argue the Milwaukee may have been overloaded. If her load was too heavy, she may have ridden too low in the water, making her vulnerable to waves crashing over the deck and into open hatches. 3. Hull damage. Others suggest that waves and steel rail cars combined to stress the hull beyond its limits. A single break in her steel skin could have flooded her quickly, overwhelming pumps. The wreck. For decades, the ferry lay undiscovered. Families mourned, but no closure came. Then, in 1972, the wreck of the Milwaukee was finally located about 3 miles off Fox Point, Wisconsin, lying in 120 feet of water. Divers found her largely intact, resting upright on the lakebed. Her rail cars still sat on their tracks, eerily preserved. Her pilot house remained, windows staring blankly into the dark. Inside, divers discovered chilling remnants, crewmen's boots, tools, and equipment frozen in time. The wreck confirmed that she had gone down suddenly, with no chance for escape. The human cost. All 27 crewmen and 1 passenger perished. For their families, the discovery of the messages in bottles was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting, final words from men who otherwise would have vanished without trace. The bodies that washed ashore were buried in cemeteries along the Michigan and Wisconsin coasts. Memorials were erected in Milwaukee and Grand Haven. To this day, the Milwaukee is remembered as one of the lake's most tragic wrecks. Legacy. The sinking of the Milwaukee underscored the dangers of ferrying heavy cargo across the lakes. In the aftermath, the Grand Trunk Line introduced stricter loading procedures and reinforced rail car securing methods. But more than safety reforms, it was the Milwaukee's ghostly messages that ensured her place in legend. Few wrecks in Great Lakes history carry the same eerie intimacy, voices of doomed sailors carried to shore, telling us exactly what happened as the ship went down. Closing reflection. The SS Milwaukee was built for strength, designed to endure the worst storms of Lake Michigan. Yet in October 1929, the lake proved stronger. She lies there still, resting quietly beneath 120 feet of water, her tracks still loaded, her cabin silent. A steel tomb for the men who wrote their final words as the waves closed over them. The Milwaukee is more than just a wreck. She is a ghost ship, her story carried on the wind and waves of Lake Michigan, her crew's voices preserved not by the lake, but by the messages they left behind. When the storm claimed her, it did not erase her completely. Those words, written in haste and despair, echo still, "This is the end, and we are all prepared." The mysterious fire of the SS Phoenix. The Great Lakes have carried millions of passengers over the centuries, immigrants, traders, families seeking new lives. But the same waters have also carried tragedy. One of the earliest and most haunting disasters was the fiery end of the SS Phoenix in 1847. She was a proud steamer, carrying hundreds of Dutch immigrants to new homes in America. But one November night, fire engulfed her on Lake Michigan, killing more than 200 people. The flames came suddenly, the cause never fully understood. Survivors spoke of chaos and horror, of leaping into icy waters, of prayers shouted against the roar of fire. The Phoenix became one of the Great Lakes' earliest ghost ships, remembered for the mystery of her fire and the scale of her loss. The ship, the SS Phoenix, was a wooden-hulled steamship launched in 1845, built in Cleveland, Ohio. Length, 140 feet, 43 meters, gross tonnage, about 300 tons, driven by a sidewheel paddle steamer engine, fueled by wood. She was typical of early Great Lakes steamers, elegant in profile but vulnerable to fire, as nearly everything aboard, hull, decks, cabins, even furnishings, was built of timber. By 1847, she was owned by the Western Transportation Company, operating as a passenger and cargo ship between Buffalo, Milwaukee, and Chicago. The final voyage on November 11, 1847, the Phoenix departed Buffalo, New York. She carried over 275 passengers, most of them Dutch immigrants bound for new lives in the Midwest, as well as crew members and a full load of freight. By November 21, she reached Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where about 70 passengers disembarked. She then set course south toward Milwaukee with over 250 people still aboard. The night was calm. The lake was still. Nothing suggested that disaster was imminent. The fires shortly after 4 a.m. on November 21, when the Phoenix was about 5 miles offshore from Sheboygan, flames erupted from her engine room. Fire on a wooden steamer was the greatest fear of any sailor. Sparks from boilers, wood fuel, or faulty flues could ignite timbers instantly. Once started, flames spread with terrifying speed. Passengers were jolted awake by smoke and shouts. Within minutes, the entire midsection of the vessel was aflame. Families rushed on deck, but the fire blocked escape routes. Lifeboats were lowered, but in the panic, most capsized or drifted away half-empty. Trapped by walls of flame and icy water on all sides, passengers faced a terrible choice: burn or jump. Chaos in the water. Dozens leapt into Lake Michigan, hoping to swim to shore. But the water was near freezing, and hypothermia set in within minutes. Survivors later spoke of screams fading quickly as the cold overcame their fellow passengers. Some clung to wreckage, praying aloud. Parents held children in their arms as they leapt together into the dark water. Only 2 lifeboats reached shore safely, carrying about 40 people. Another few survivors clung to floating debris until they were rescued by boats from Sheboygan. But the vast majority, over 190 men, women, and children, perished. Survivors painted scenes of horror, families separated in the crush of panicked passengers. Mothers refusing to abandon their children, embracing them as fire consumed the decks. Men throwing themselves into the lake rather than face the flames. The glow of the burning steamer lighting the night sky for miles. One survivor, a Dutch immigrant, recalled, "The flames ran like the wind across the deck. My wife and children were beside me. In one moment they were gone, swallowed by fire and smoke." By dawn, the Phoenix was reduced to a smoldering hulk, drifting aimlessly until she sank near Sheboygan's harbor. The aftermath, the final death toll was estimated at 190 to 250 lives, though records were imprecise. Most victims were Dutch immigrants, many traveling as families. It was the deadliest Great Lakes disaster of its era. The tragedy devastated immigrant communities in Wisconsin and Michigan. Entire families had been wiped out. Survivors were left destitute, with no relatives in America to support them. Mass graves were dug in Sheboygan to bury the dead, their names often unknown. The mystery of the fire. How did the Phoenix catch fire so suddenly? Several theories have emerged. 1. Boiler sparks/mechanical failure. The most widely accepted explanation is that sparks from her boiler flues ignited nearby woodwork or cargo. Poorly maintained flues could overheat, setting the wooden hull ablaze. 2. Cargo ignition. Some suggest the fire may have started in cargo, barrels of pitch, oil, or other flammable goods. In the cramped holds of a wooden steamer, such materials could ignite easily if stored near heat. 3. Human negligence. Others blame carelessness, a lantern tipped over, or crew failing to control boiler temperatures during the night. Investigators later criticized the crew's lack of discipline in launching lifeboats. Why so many perished? The scale of loss on the Phoenix was not just about fire, it was about timing and conditions. The fire began in the early morning, when most passengers were asleep below decks. The ship was only 5 miles from shore, but freezing water made swimming impossible. Lifeboats were few, poorly handled, and overcrowded. Most never made it far from the burning vessel. The wooden superstructure fueled the fire like kindling, giving passengers little time to react. Legacy. The tragedy of the Phoenix shocked the Great Lakes. Newspapers described it as one of the most horrific maritime fires in memory. In response, calls were made for stricter safety regulations, more lifeboats, better firefighting equipment, improved boiler maintenance. Slowly, standards improved, though fires on wooden steamers remained a threat well into the 19th century. For the Dutch-American community, the Phoenix became a symbol of sacrifice. Many of those who died were immigrants seeking freedom and prosperity in America. Their lives were cut short just as their journeys neared an end. Ghost ship legends. Like many Great Lakes tragedies, the Phoenix spawned ghost stories. For decades, sailors claimed to see strange lights off Sheboygan, a fiery glow on the water, like a ship burning silently in the distance. Locals whispered that the spirits of the lost immigrants still drift across Lake Michigan, forever reliving that night of fire. Divers exploring the wreck in later years found only scattered remains buried in silt, but the legends endure. Closing reflection. The story of the SS Phoenix is one of fire, desperation, and mystery. She was only 5 miles from shore when flames claimed her. Why did the fire start so suddenly? Why did so few lifeboats succeed? And why must history be written so often in tragedy before change takes root? More than 200 souls were lost that night. Their names are mostly forgotten, but their story remains a warning, that the promise of new life can be extinguished in a moment by fate, fire, and water. The Phoenix was one of the first great maritime disasters of the Great Lakes. But she would not be the last. Her ghost still lingers in the annals of lake lore, a reminder of how fragile life was on the wooden steamers of the 19th century, and how quickly dreams can turn to ash. The mysterious sinking of HMS Wasp. The sea has always been the greatest test of ships and sailors. Even the mightiest navies have lost vessels not to battle, but to silence, sudden wrecks, hidden rocks, and the mysteries of human error. Among these tragedies is the loss of HMS Wasp, a small Royal Navy gunboat that sank off the coast of Ireland in 1884. In calm seas, under clear skies, she struck rocks and went down in minutes. Of her 52 crew, only 6 survived. The disaster shocked Britain, and whispers of superstition spread through the villages along Ireland's rugged Donegal coast. Was it bad luck, human error, or something more mysterious? The story of HMS Wasp is a haunting tale of fate and folly. The ship HMS Wasp was a composite gunboat of the Royal Navy's Banter class, launched in 1880. Length, 125 feet, 38 meters, displacement, 465 tons powered by both steam engines and sails. Armed with two 6-inch guns and several smaller weapons. She was not a large warship, but she played an important role in Britain's maritime empire. Like other gunboats of her type, she was used for patrol duties, carrying messages, and enforcing British rule along coasts and rivers. By 1884, the Wasp was stationed off Ireland, tasked with supporting local authorities, ferrying officials, and showing the Union Jack in troubled waters. The final voyage on the evening of September 21, 1884, HMS Wasp departed from Westport, Ireland. Her orders were routine but unpopular. She was to deliver officials to Tory Island, a remote community off Donegal, to supervise evictions of tenants behind on rent. For the people of Tory, the Navy's presence was a symbol of oppression. The assignment was politically sensitive, and the Wasp sailed into uneasy waters. The night was calm. The sea was smooth. The crew, confident in their small gunboat, relaxed as the ship cut northward through the Atlantic. But in the early hours of the morning, disaster struck. The wreck at around 3:55 a.m. on September 22, 1884, the Wasp slammed into Tory Island's rocks. The impact tore through her thin hull. Seawater rushed in. Within minutes, the gunboat was sinking. Crewmen scrambled on deck, but most were still asleep below and never escaped. Lifeboats could not be launched in time. By the time dawn broke, the Wasp was gone, her timbers broken on the reefs of Tory Island. Of her 52 men, only 6 survived, clinging to wreckage until they reached the shore. It was one of the worst peacetime losses of a Royal Navy gunboat. Shock and inquiry. The loss of HMS Wasp stunned both the Navy and the public. How could a modern ship, sailing in good weather, strike rocks on a well-charted coast? A naval inquiry was convened. The findings were troubling. No proper lookout had been posted at the time of the collision. Charts and navigation equipment were in disarray. The compass had not been consulted for some time. The ship was running on steam power only, with her sails stowed, limiting maneuverability. In short, the Wasp had been sailing almost blind. The court-martial concluded that the wreck was due to gross negligence on the part of her officers. With charts ignored and lookouts absent, the gunboat had simply driven herself onto the rocks. The superstition yet among the people of Tory Island, another explanation was whispered. The Wasp had been sailing to enforce evictions, to cast poor tenant families out of their homes. For many locals, her mission was cursed from the start. They believed the island itself, long steeped in folklore, had rejected her. Some claimed the priests of Tory had cursed the ship. Others said the island's legendary fairies or ancient spirits had guided her to the rocks. Whatever the truth, the story of the curse of Tory spread quickly, giving the wreck an aura of the supernatural. Survivors' stories of the 6 men who lived, their accounts were harrowing. They described waking to the sound of tearing steel, the rush of seawater, and the screams of comrades trapped below decks. One survivor recalled clinging to floating debris in the blackness, watching the gunboat vanish into the waves, carrying dozens of his shipmates down with her. By morning, the people of Tory Island helped the survivors ashore. Despite their resentment of the Navy's mission, they offered food, blankets, and care. The human cost. The wreck claimed 46 lives, young sailors, officers, and Marines. Their bodies were buried along the Donegal coast, far from their homes. For the Royal Navy, the loss was both a tragedy and an embarrassment. It revealed lapses in discipline and training that no great power wished to admit. For the people of Tory Island, it was both a miracle and a mystery, a ship that had come to evict them destroyed instead on their reefs. Legacy. The wreck of HMS Wasp faded into history, but it left behind lessons and legends. For the Royal Navy, it was a reminder of the dangers of complacency. Even in peacetime, vigilance was essential. For the Irish coast, it became part of folklore, a tale of curses and divine justice, told for generations. For maritime historians, it remains a classic case of human negligence compounded by fate. Today, the wreckage of the Wasp still lies off Tory Island, scattered among the rocks. Few divers visit, the waters are treacherous, the current strong. But the story of her loss is still told in Donegal, where memory and myth intertwine. Closing reflection. The loss of HMS Wasp is more than a tale of a shipwreck. It is a story of pride and punishment, of sailors undone not by storm or enemy fire, but by their own neglect. Why did the officers allow the ship to steam blind into rocks? Were they overconfident? Fatigued? Or was there, as the islanders believe, something darker at play, a curse that doomed the gunboat before she left port? The sea keeps its secrets, but the wreck of the Wasp reminds us that the greatest dangers are often not the storm or the reef, but human complacency itself. In the dark waters off Tory Island, the gunboat lies still, a ghost of the Royal Navy, remembered in both history and legend as the ship that sailed into a curse. The fate of HMS Sapphire, scuttled, lost, and legendary. The oceans hide not only storms and wrecks, but also the shadows of war. During the 17th century, as England and France fought for dominance of the New World, dozens of ships vanished in those northern waters. One of them was HMS Sapphire, a Royal Navy frigate scuttled off Newfoundland in 1696. Her captain ordered her destroyed rather than allow capture by the enemy. But her story did not end there. For centuries, her wreck remained hidden, and her fate gave rise to whispers of ghosts and curses along the rugged coasts of Newfoundland. The ship HMS Sapphire was a 32-gun, fifth-rate frigate, launched in 1675. Length, about 110 feet, 34 meters, crew, around 150 men armed with a mix of demi-culverins and smaller guns. She was built in Deptford, England, as part of the Royal Navy's expansion after the Anglo-Dutch Wars. Fifth-rate frigates like the Sapphire were fast, versatile ships, powerful enough to fight, but light enough to scout, raid, and patrol distant waters. For 2 decades, she served in the Navy's squadrons, carrying out routine escort and patrol duties. By the 1690s, she was dispatched to North America as England and France clashed in what became known as King William's War. The war in Newfoundland. By 1696, the war had spread to Newfoundland, then a vital fishing and trading hub. French privateers, backed by warships, raided English settlements. St. John's, the largest English harbour, was under constant threat. The Sapphire was sent there to help defend British interests, escort convoys, and block French raids. But in the summer of 1696, she faced overwhelming odds. The final engagement on September 11, 1696, the Sapphire anchored at Bay Bulls, south of St. John's. Her captain, Thomas Cleasby, had intelligence that a powerful French force under Admiral d'Iberville was approaching. French ships closed in quickly. The Sapphire, outnumbered and outgunned, could not hope to escape. Her captain made a grim decision: rather than let his frigate fall into enemy hands, he ordered her scuttled. Charges were set, fires lit, and the crew abandoned ship. Moments later, the frigate exploded and sank beneath the waves, her guns, stores, and timbers lost to the sea. The French captured the survivors, but the ship herself was gone. Aftermath: the scuttling of HMS Sapphire was a heavy blow for the Royal Navy. Critics accused her captain of surrendering too quickly. A court-martial later acquitted him, noting the overwhelming French force and the impossibility of escape. Still, the loss marked a low point in Britain's defense of Newfoundland. Within weeks, French raiders burned English settlements up and down the coast, leaving St. John's in ruins. The Sapphire lay forgotten beneath the waves, her name remembered only in naval records. Rediscovery of the wreck: for centuries, the exact location of the Sapphire was unknown. Local fishermen in Bay Bulls spoke of strange timbers beneath their nets, of shadows on the seabed, of ghostly lights in the bay. In 1977, a team of marine archaeologists rediscovered her wreck near Bay Bulls harbor. Excavations revealed fascinating details. Her wooden hull was remarkably preserved in the cold North Atlantic water. Dozens of iron cannonballs and fragments of her artillery lay scattered. Personal items, clay pipes, buttons, and tools, gave glimpses into the daily lives of her crew. The wreck confirmed the story of her scuttling. She had been deliberately sunk, her timbers charred, her guns silent forever. Today, the site is protected under Newfoundland law as one of Canada's most important historic shipwrecks. The ghostly legends, like many wrecks, the Sapphire also became a source of legend. Locals told stories of strange lights over bay bulls, of phantom cannon fire on stormy nights, of shadowy figures seen along the coast. Fishermen claimed nets sometimes snagged on ghost timbers below, and when pulled up, would come back scorched, as though touched by the fire that consumed the ship. For some, the loss of the Sapphire was seen as a curse, a symbol of the hardships endured by Newfoundland's English settlers during those long wars with France. Historical importance: the Sapphire is one of the few 17th-century Royal Navy wrecks ever found in Canadian waters. Her discovery offered archaeologists rare insights: ship construction of the late Stuart Navy, the global reach of Britain's naval presence, even in the North Atlantic frontier, the lives of sailors serving far from home, caught in a colonial war of empire. For Newfoundland, she is a link to a turbulent past, when fishing villages were battlefields and even the smallest coves echoed with cannon fire. The human cost behind the history were the men of the Sapphire. Some were killed in the scuttling, others captured, all torn from their mission by war and fate. Their artifacts, buttons, buckles, pipes, remind us that they were not just sailors, but fathers, sons, and brothers, far from England's shores. For the people of Bay Bulls, the ship's loss became part of local memory, carried through generations in both fact and folklore. Closing reflection: the story of HMS Sapphire is one of both strategy and sorrow. She was not sunk in battle, but by her own captain's order, a sacrifice to keep her from the enemy. Yet her end did not save St. John's, nor did it change the tide of war. Why do we remember her? Perhaps because her wreck tells two stories: the hard truth of empire and war, and the haunting myths of the sea. In Bay Bulls, she is not just a wreck, she is a ghost, her spirit lingering where timbers burned and men abandoned hope. The Sapphire lies beneath Newfoundland's cold waters still, her guns silent, her crew long gone. But in every storm that lashes the coast, some say her presence can still be felt, a reminder that even the strongest ships may one day sail into silence. From HMS Juno to the lost Atlanta, a ship's mysterious fate. The ocean remembers ships not for what they were, but for how they were lost. One vessel of the Royal Navy began her life as HMS Juno, a proud frigate launched in 1844. She ended it with a different name, HMS Atlanta, vanishing without a trace in 1880, taking more than 280 souls with her. Her story spans decades, from battleship to training ship, from hope to mystery. Today, she is remembered not as Juno, but as the ghostly Atlanta, one of the Royal Navy's greatest unexplained tragedies. HMS Juno, a frigate of the 1840s. HMS Juno was launched in 1844 at Devonport Dockyard. Type: 26-gun, 6th-rate frigate built of oak, sail-powered, with a sleek hull designed for speed and maneuverability. Armed with carronades and long guns, capable of patrol, escort, and combat duties. She entered service during a transitional age. The Navy still relied on wooden sailing ships, but steam power and ironclads were beginning to change naval warfare forever. For years, Juno performed routine duties across Britain's far-flung empire. She carried messages, patrolled trade routes, and represented British power abroad. By the 1860s, however, she was already outdated. Newer steam-driven iron ships made her role as a combat vessel obsolete. A new role rather than scrap her, the Admiralty converted Juno for another purpose. In 1869, she was repurposed as a training vessel for naval cadets. In this new role, she was stationed in the West Indies, where she provided young sailors with their first experience of life at sea. She became not a warship, but a classroom afloat, her guns silent, her rigging still teaching seamanship in the age of steam. In 1878, she was renamed HMS Atlanta, after the fleet-footed maiden of Greek mythology. By then, she was a relic, more than 30 years old, yet still tasked with shaping the Navy's future officers. The final voyage on January 31, 1880, HMS Atlanta, formerly Juno, sailed from Bermuda bound for Falmouth, England. On board were, around 281 people, most of them young cadets in training. A small number of officers and seasoned crew. Stores of supplies for the Atlantic crossing. The voyage was expected to be a routine passage, giving the cadets long experience at sea before returning them to the fleet. But Atlanta was overloaded. Reports later suggested she carried far more cadets than usual, crowding her decks and stretching resources. Many of these young men had only limited sailing experience. The ship was also old. Her design belonged to an earlier era, and her stability under heavy load was questionable. Still, she departed Bermuda with confidence. She was never seen again. Into the Atlantic. February 1880 was a brutal month in the North Atlantic. Gale-force winds and massive seas battered the shipping lanes. Other vessels reported struggling through towering waves and icy squalls. The Atlanta, heavily laden and crewed mostly by teenagers, may have been hopelessly vulnerable. No distress signals were ever received. No wreckage was conclusively identified. The ship simply vanished. By March, when she failed to arrive in England, fears grew. By spring, she was declared lost with all hands. Shock and grief. The loss of HMS Atlanta devastated Britain. More than 280 families had lost sons, many barely out of school. Newspapers described the tragedy as one of the worst in Royal Navy history. What made it even harder to bear was the complete absence of answers. Unlike many wrecks, no survivors, lifeboats, or debris were recovered. The sea had swallowed ship and crew whole. Theories of the disappearance for more than a century, historians and sailors have debated what doomed the ship once known as HMS Juno. Several theories remain. 1. Overcrowding and inexperience. The ship carried far more cadets than was safe. With so many inexperienced hands, she may have been difficult to manage in a storm. Inexperienced sailors might have failed to reef sails, secure lines, or balance the ship in high seas. 2. Structural weakness. By 1880, the Atlanta was 36 years old. Wooden ships often suffered rot and weakness, particularly in tropical waters. A violent storm may have stressed her hull beyond its limits, causing catastrophic failure. 3. Instability. Naval architects later suggested the ship was inherently unstable when fully loaded. Her high rigging and heavy cargo made her top-heavy. In rough seas, she may have capsized suddenly. 4. The storms of 1880. The North Atlantic in February 1880 was infamous for violent weather. Records show major gales struck the very region she would have crossed. Other ships barely survived. If Atlanta was caught in the center of such a storm, she may have been overwhelmed in hours. 5. The Bermuda Triangle. In later years, writers tied her loss to the so-called Bermuda Triangle, the region infamous for mysterious vanishings. While historians dismiss this as coincidence, the fact that she departed Bermuda and vanished without trace gave the legend fuel. A haunting parallel. What made the Atlanta's loss even more haunting was its similarity to the loss of HMS Eurydice, another training ship, which had capsized in a sudden squall off the Isle of Wight in 1878, killing more than 300 men. The back-to-back disasters raised serious questions about the Royal Navy's practice of training so many cadets on outdated sailing ships. The human cost. The young cadets aboard were not battle-hardened sailors. They were teenagers, many embarking on their first long voyage. For their families, the loss was devastating, sons gone not to war, but to training. Without bodies or wreckage, grief had no closure. Parents clung to rumors of survivors, sightings, even castaway colonies, but none proved true. The Atlanta had vanished utterly, her fate sealed in silence. Legacy. The tragedy forced the Royal Navy to reconsider its training methods. Gradually, the Navy shifted away from overloading cadets onto aging sailing frigates, and instead used modern training ships and shore-based institutions. But the Atlanta, once HMS Juno, lived on in memory. She became a symbol of youthful lives lost, of the risks of neglect, and of the sea's unforgiving power. Closing reflection: the ship that began life as HMS Juno in 1844 ended it as the Atlanta, lost in 1880 with nearly 300 aboard. She was not defeated in battle, nor sunk by enemy fire, but swallowed by storms, by age, and by human misjudgment. Why did she vanish? Was it the fury of the Atlantic, the weakness of her timbers, or the inexperience of her crew? Or was it simply fate, the sea claiming a ship long past her time? The truth may never be known. Somewhere beneath the waves of the Atlantic, the frigate once called Juno rests in silence, her cadets with her, remembered not for her decades of service but for her sudden disappearance. She is both HMS Juno and HMS Atlanta, one ship, two names, and a single haunting legacy. The lost HMS Centaur, vanished in the great hurricane. The sea has claimed ships in storms for as long as men have sailed. But some disasters stand out not only for their scale, but for their silence. One such loss is that of HMS Centaur, a British sloop of war that disappeared in the Great Hurricane of 1782. Caught in one of the fiercest storms ever recorded in the Caribbean, the Centaur and her crew were lost without survivors. Her story is part of a larger tragedy, a hurricane that destroyed an entire fleet, leaving behind only fragments of ships and whispered legends of the dead. The ship HMS Centaur was an 18-gun sloop of war, a small but nimble warship of the Royal Navy. Armed with 18-pounder carronades, suited for close combat. Crew complement, around 150 men. Designed for speed, scouting, and escort duties rather than line-of-battle engagements. By the 1780s, Britain was embroiled in the American Revolutionary War. The Caribbean was a vital theater, where France, Spain, and Britain fought bitterly for control of sugar-rich islands. The Centaur was one of dozens of ships patrolling those waters, escorting convoys and defending colonial ports. The Great Hurricane of 1782 on September 16, 1782, as the war neared its end, disaster struck. A hurricane of unimaginable force swept across the eastern Caribbean. Winds reached more than 130 knots, waves towered like mountains, and rain lashed with the force of cannon fire. Entire fleets were caught unprepared. At St. Lucia, Admiral Thomas Graves' fleet, more than 30 ships, was anchored when the storm descended. It lasted 3 days, destroying warships and merchantmen alike. The Centaur, stationed in these waters, was among those that vanished. The wreck details of Centaur's final moments are unknown. No survivors lived to tell the tale. But from what is known of the hurricane's destruction, her fate was almost certainly swift and merciless. Her wooden hull would have been torn apart by repeated battering waves. Masts and rigging, designed for maneuver, would have snapped in hurricane-force winds. Below decks, terrified sailors may have fought to pump water as the ship foundered. When the storm cleared, the Centaur was gone. Only wreckage, splintered timbers, shattered boats, fragments of cargo, washed ashore on nearby islands. A fleet destroyed. The Centaur was only one victim of the Great Hurricane. In total, more than 40 British ships were sunk or wrecked, with the loss of thousands of lives. Entire convoys vanished. Heavy warships were driven ashore or capsized in open sea. Admiral Graves himself barely survived, his flagship reduced to a battered hulk. For Britain, it was one of the worst natural disasters to ever befall the Royal Navy, and it came not from cannon fire or enemy action, but from nature's wrath. Mystery and silence. Why remember HMS Centaur in particular? Because unlike some of the larger ships that left survivors or accounts of the storm, the Centaur left nothing. No eyewitness. No logs. No reports of her last struggle. Only her name, recorded among the lost, and the grief of families who never saw their sailors return. Her complete erasure from the record made her loss feel ghostly, almost unreal, a ship here one day, gone the next, swallowed whole by the storm. The human cost for the 150 men aboard, the hurricane was their end. Sailors who had endured years of war, disease, and hardship were claimed not in battle, but in minutes of chaos. Letters home stopped arriving. Families waited for news that never came. Parish rolls across Britain quietly marked "Lost in the Hurricane." The tragedy was immense, but in an age before modern communications, it faded quickly into the larger catastrophe. The men of Centaur vanished into history with barely a record of their names. Lessons from the storm. The Great Hurricane of 1782 revealed the vulnerability of wooden sailing navies to natural disaster. Anchors failed under the strain of massive seas, dragging ships helplessly onto reefs. Overcrowded convoys had no room to maneuver. Weak hulls and heavy guns made smaller ships like the Centaur especially vulnerable. The Navy learned painful lessons about hurricane seasons, weather signs, and the dangers of anchoring in exposed harbors. But for the Centaur, the lessons came too late. Folklore and ghost stories. In the years after, sailors told tales of ghostly ships seen off the Leeward Islands, fragments of masts drifting under phantom sail, lanterns burning where no crew could be. Locals whispered that some wreckage belonged to the lost Centaur. Even today, divers occasionally find 18th-century cannon or timbers along reefs in St. Lucia and Dominica, relics of the hurricane's destruction. None can be definitively tied to the Centaur, but they carry her shadow. Closing reflection. The story of HMS Centaur is less about a single ship than about the power of nature itself. She was one of dozens caught in the Great Hurricane of 1782, but her complete disappearance, without survivors or witnesses, gives her loss a special weight. She reminds us that not all naval mysteries are about enemy action, sabotage, or curses. Sometimes the greatest mystery is simply how fragile men and ships are before the sea. The Centaur rests somewhere beneath the Caribbean waves, alongside countless other wrecks of 1782. Her crew are gone, their voices silent, their last moments unknown. But in every hurricane that lashes those islands, sailors still remember her name, a ghost of the Royal Navy, lost not to war, but to the unstoppable force of wind and water. The vanishing of HMS Affray, Britain's lost submarine. The ocean has always been the silent graveyard of submarines. One mistake, one failure, and a crew can vanish without a trace. In April 1951, during the tense early years of the Cold War, the Royal Navy lost HMS Affray, a submarine that disappeared overnight in the English Channel with all 75 men aboard. Her sudden loss sparked panic. Some believed it was enemy action. Others whispered of sabotage. For 2 weeks, Britain searched the seas, fearing the worst. When she was finally found, the mystery was only partly solved, and questions about her last hours linger even today. The submarine HMS Affray was an Amphion-class submarine, launched in 1944. Length, 281 feet, 86 meters, beam, 22 feet, 6.7 meters, displacement, 1,620 tons surfaced, 2,030 tons submerged, capable of 18 knots on the surface and 15 knots underwater. Crew, around 60 men, plus trainees or special units. Built too late to see combat in World War II, she spent her early years in reserve. By 1951, she had been modified for new roles in the Cold War era. She could carry special boat service, SBS, commandos, conduct covert landings, and simulate modern warfare tactics. Though aging, she was considered seaworthy. Her loss shocked Britain not because she was obsolete, but because she was trusted. The final voyage. On the evening of April 16, 1951, HMS Affray departed from Portland, Dorset on a training mission called Exercise Spring Train. Aboard were 50 crew members, 4 officers, 18 Royal Navy trainees, 3 Royal Marines SBS commandos, in total, 75 men, one of the largest submarine complements lost by the Royal Navy in peacetime. Her orders: conduct a mock war patrol in the English Channel, surface near Alderney in the Channel Islands, and return within 4 days. At 9 p.m., she sent a final message, submerging for exercise. After that, silence. The Vanishing. By dawn on April 17, HMS Affray failed to report her position. The Navy raised the alarm. Within hours, a massive search began. Dozens of ships, aircraft, and submarines scoured the channel. Families waited anxiously, while newspapers speculated about disaster. Was it an accident? A mechanical failure? Or something darker, an act of Soviet sabotage, a torpedo, or a spy plot? The Cold War atmosphere made every rumor plausible. For 2 weeks, no trace was found. The Affray had vanished as though the sea had swallowed her whole. The discovery on June 14, 1951, after nearly 2 months of searching, the wreck was finally located. Using sonar, searchers found her lying on the seabed, about 46 miles north of Alderney, in 275 feet, 85 meters, of water. She was upright, her hull largely intact. There were no signs of explosion or collision. No crew had escaped. The entire complement had perished. The question remained, why? The Board of Inquiry examined the wreck carefully. Divers and cameras studied the exterior. Reports from salvage tugs were analyzed. Several possible causes emerged. 1. Snort mast failure. The most accepted theory involves her snort mast, a device that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, drawing in air and expelling exhaust. If the mast collapsed or leaked, water could have rushed into the submarine. This would have shorted electrical systems, filled compartments, and caused rapid flooding. Some evidence suggested the snort mast had indeed broken off. 2. Battery explosion. Another theory was a battery explosion. Submarines of the era carried huge lead-acid batteries. If seawater leaked into the battery compartment, it could produce chlorine gas and fire. This could incapacitate the crew almost instantly. 3. Human error. The Affray carried many trainees on her final voyage. Some speculated that inexperience, or errors under training pressure, might have contributed to disaster. But this theory has never been proven. 4. Enemy action. In the climate of 1951, some feared Soviet involvement. Was the Affray torpedoed by a submarine shadowing British waters? Was sabotage involved? No evidence ever supported this theory. The Cold War paranoia amplified the rumors, but investigators found no sign of external attack. The verdict in the end, the official conclusion was snort mast failure. The mast, already known to be fragile, may have snapped in heavy seas. When water poured into the submarine, she sank before the crew could react. But the inquiry admitted uncertainty. With no survivors and limited access to the wreck, the precise sequence of events could never be fully proven. The ghostly reputation the loss of the Affray gave rise to eerie legends. Families of the crew reported strange dreams or feelings on the night of her sinking. Some claimed to have seen ghostly apparitions of sailors. Among submariners, she became a cautionary tale. Crews whispered that the Affray still patrolled the channel in ghostly silence, a reminder of the sea's unforgiving nature. The human cost. All 75 men aboard perished, sailors, officers, trainees, and commandos. It was the worst peacetime submarine loss in British history. For the families, grief was compounded by uncertainty. Weeks of waiting turned hope into despair. Many never received bodies to bury, the wreck itself became the tomb. For the Royal Navy, the loss was devastating to morale. The Cold War had only just begun, and Britain had lost an entire crew not to enemy fire, but to mystery. Legacy. The Affray's sinking prompted reforms. Snort masts were redesigned to withstand stress and prevent flooding. Training protocols were revised, especially when carrying cadets. The Navy invested more in submarine rescue technology, recognizing how quickly accidents could claim lives. The wreck itself remains a war grave, protected by law. No salvage has been attempted, out of respect for the dead. Closing reflection. The story of HMS Affray is not just a naval tragedy, it is a mystery of silence. One moment she was sending a routine signal. The next, she was gone, 75 men entombed in steel beneath the English Channel. Why did she sink? Was it the fragile snort mast, a battery explosion, or something we may never know? The truth lies 275 feet down, locked within her rusting hull. For families and sailors, the loss is not just technical but deeply human, a reminder that the sea, even in peacetime, can claim everything without warning. The HMS Affray rests still on the seabed, her crew with her. A ghost of the Cold War, silent, mysterious, and remembered. The tragedy of the SS Huron. The Great Lakes have always been lifelines of trade, but also graveyards of ships. Among the many lost to storm and water, few disasters were as grim or as haunting as the sinking of the SS Huron in 1877. A proud Canadian steamer built for commerce, she vanished into a furious gale on Lake Superior, taking more than 100 souls with her. For decades, her fate was shrouded in silence, until divers found her wreck in the late 20th century, a ghost ship resting quietly on the lakebed. The ship the Huron was launched in 1867, built at Port Huron, Michigan. She was a wooden-hulled sidewheel steamer, designed to carry both freight and passengers across the Great Lakes. Length, 204 feet, 62 meters, beam, 35 feet, 11 meters, gross tonnage, about 1,000 tons, powered by side-mounted paddle wheels driven by a steam engine. She was part of the palace steamer era, vessels that combined practicality with luxury. While her main duty was carrying iron ore and freight, she also had cabins and saloons for passengers traveling between ports on Lake Superior. The final voyage on November 11, 1877, the Huron departed from Port Arthur, Ontario, modern Thunder Bay, heavily loaded with 1,000 tons of iron ore and carrying more than 100 passengers and crew. Her destination was Sarnia, at the southern end of Lake Huron. To get there, she had to cross the full length of Lake Superior in late autumn, always a perilous gamble. The captain was A.W. McLeod, an experienced sailor. He knew November storms well, but time was money, and he pressed on. Into the storm on November 12, as the Huron steamed eastward along Lake Superior's treacherous north shore, the weather turned. A violent gale swept down from the northwest. Winds screamed across the lake. Waves rose to more than 20 feet. Snow and sleet slashed visibility. The Huron fought through the night, her paddle wheels straining, her timbers groaning under the pounding seas. Passengers huddled below, praying as the ship lurched and rolled. Crewmen battled to keep her on course, but by dawn, it was clear she was in grave danger. The wreck. Sometime on the morning of November 12, 1877, the Huron was overwhelmed. Her cargo of iron ore made her ride low in the water. As waves broke over her decks, she took on more and more water. Her pumps could not keep up. The sidewheels, battered by seas, lost power. Suddenly, she lurched and began to founder. Panic swept the decks. Lifeboats were lowered, but most were smashed in the surf or capsized immediately. Within minutes, the Huron was gone, swallowed by the storm. The human cost of the more than 100 people aboard, only about 25 survived. Most were crewmen who clung to wreckage and were washed ashore by the storm. The dead included families of immigrants, passengers bound for new lives, and sailors who had worked the lakes for decades. Bodies washed ashore for days afterward along Lake Superior's north coast. Many were buried in unmarked graves near Rossport, Ontario, close to where the wreck had gone down. For communities along the lake, it was a devastating blow. Entire families were wiped out. Mystery of the loss. Why did the Huron sink so suddenly? Several factors likely combined. 1. Overloading her cargo of iron ore was extremely heavy. Loaded deep, she rode low in the water, leaving little freeboard against the storm waves. 2. Wooden hull fatigue. By 1877, she was 10 years old, and her wooden hull may have weakened under stress. Reports suggest her seams may have opened in the pounding seas, allowing water to flood quickly. 3. Paddle wheel vulnerability. Sidewheel steamers, though effective in calm water, were notoriously poor in rough seas. Their paddle boxes could be smashed by waves, crippling propulsion. Rediscovery of the wreck. For more than a century, the Huron lay hidden. Then, in the 1970s, divers located her remains near Rossport, Ontario, in hundreds of feet of water. They found her hull largely intact, preserved by the cold, fresh depths of Lake Superior. Her paddle wheels, iron machinery, and timbers lay quiet on the lakebed. Artifacts such as dishes, cargo, and even personal belongings gave a frozen glimpse of life aboard her last voyage. Divers described the sight as haunting, cabins still recognizable, the great paddle wheels resting silently in the dark. Legacy: the Huron's sinking was one of the deadliest Great Lakes tragedies of the 19th century. It underscored the dangers of autumn sailing, the limitations of wooden paddle steamers, and the risks of carrying heavy or in rough weather. Her loss contributed to the gradual decline of wooden sidewheelers, as shipping companies shifted to iron-hulled propeller-driven vessels that could better withstand the lake storms. For the families of the lost, however, no innovation could erase their grief. The wreck became another chapter in Lake Superior's long history of sorrow. The ghostly reputation: like many Superior wrecks, the Huron also entered local folklore. Fishermen spoke of strange lights seen on stormy nights near Rossport. Some claimed to hear phantom paddle wheels churning beneath the waves. On quiet nights, locals swore they heard cries carried across the wind, echoes of the doomed passengers. Whether myth or memory, the Huron became part of the Great Lakes ghost ship tradition. Closing reflection: the SS Huron was a proud steamer, built to connect communities and carry the lifeblood of industry across the inland seas. Yet in November 1877, she became another victim of Lake Superior's fury. Why did she sink? Was it simply the storm, or the weight of her iron ore, or flaws in her design? Perhaps it was all three, conspiring against her on that cold November night. Her wreck lies silent now, preserved in the cold depths, her story remembered only by history and legend. But like the Kamloops, Emperor, and Algoma, she reminds us that the Great Lakes are not just highways of trade, they are graveyards, where ships and souls are kept forever. The Huron remains a ghost ship of Lake Superior, her paddle wheels stilled, her crew lost, her presence lingering in the whispers of wind and wave. The disappearance of Le Griffin, the first ghost ship of the Great Lakes. Every shipwreck has a story. Some are tales of storms, some of fire, some of war. But the story of Le Griffin is older, deeper, and more mysterious than most. Launched in 1679, she was the very first European-style sailing vessel on the upper Great Lakes, a bold symbol of exploration and ambition. Yet within months of her maiden voyage, she vanished completely, leaving behind no wreck, no survivors, and no answers. Nearly 350 years later, the mystery of Le Griffin remains unsolved, the Great Lakes' very first ghost ship. The vision of La Salle in the 1670s, France sought to expand its influence in North America. Explorers dreamed of linking the Great Lakes with the Mississippi River and beyond, creating a trade network to rival Spain's empire. René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, was one of the most ambitious of these explorers. To secure control of the fur trade and expand French power, he envisioned a ship, not a canoe or a small bark, but a full-rigged sailing vessel, capable of carrying tons of cargo across the inland seas. It was a daring idea. No one had ever attempted to build such a ship in the wilderness of the Great Lakes. Building the ship, La Salle and his men began construction in early 1679 on the Niagara River, near modern-day Cayuga Island, New York. Using timber cut from local forests, and with help from shipwrights and even Catholic missionaries, they labored for months. The ship that emerged was revolutionary for the region: length, estimated 45 to 60 feet, 14 to 20 meters, beam, about 15 feet, 5 meters, burden, roughly 45 tons, equipped with 7 small cannon and 3 swivel guns, rigged as a brigantine, with square sails and a bowsprit. She was christened Le Griffin, the Griffin, in honor of Count Frontenac, governor of New France, whose coat of arms bore the mythical beast. When she slid into the waters of the Niagara in the summer of 1679, native peoples and French settlers alike marveled. She was unlike anything they had seen before, the first ship of the lakes. The maiden voyage in August 1679, Le Griffin set sail with La Salle, 32 crewmen, and a cargo of supplies and trade goods. Her mission: to sail through Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and into Lake Michigan, establishing a French presence and trading directly with tribes along the route. She successfully navigated the Niagara Rapids, the Detroit River, and Lake Huron, feats no vessel of her size had ever attempted. By September, she reached Green Bay, Wisconsin, where La Salle traded for vast quantities of furs. The mission was a success. With her holds filled with pelts, La Salle prepared to send the ship back east, while he himself pushed further inland to explore. The disappearance on September 18, 1679, Le Griffin departed Green Bay, loaded with furs worth a fortune in France. A crew of 6, commanded by pilot Luc de la Motte, was tasked with sailing her back toward Niagara. She never arrived. No wreckage was ever reported. No survivors reached shore. La Salle, waiting anxiously, eventually accepted the truth: Le Griffin had vanished into the Great Lakes. Theories of the loss for over 3 centuries, historians and treasure hunters have debated what became of the Griffin. Many theories exist, but none are conclusive. 1. Storm on Lake Michigan. The most widely accepted theory is that Le Griffin was caught in a violent storm soon after leaving Green Bay. Lake Michigan is notorious for sudden gales, even in autumn. A ship as small and untested as the Griffin, heavily laden with furs, may have capsized or broken apart. If so, she lies somewhere beneath Lake Michigan, entombed in sand and silt. 2. Mutiny and desertion. Some suggest treachery. The 6 crewmen, entrusted with valuable furs, may have killed the officers, scuttled the ship, and escaped with the cargo. Yet no evidence of stolen pelts ever surfaced in colonial records, and mutineers would have struggled to transport such wealth secretly. 3. Attack by natives. Another possibility is conflict with indigenous tribes hostile to La Salle. But most local groups had good relations with the French at the time. No records of an attack were ever passed down, making this less likely. 4. Sabotage by rivals. La Salle's ambitions had many enemies, including rival French traders. Some believe agents sabotaged the Griffin before or during her voyage. Again, no proof exists, but suspicion lingered in La Salle's mind until his death. The search for the wreck. Since the 19th century, explorers have hunted for Le Griffin. Dozens of supposed discoveries have been announced, from Lake Huron to Lake Michigan. Each time, hopes rose, and each time, experts concluded the wreckage belonged to a later ship. In 2001, divers near Poverty Island in northern Lake Michigan claimed to have found her bowsprit. Further investigation, however, suggested it was from a 19th-century vessel. As of today, the Griffin's true resting place remains a mystery. She has never been definitively located. Legacy. Though she vanished, Le Griffin left a powerful legacy. She proved that the Great Lakes could carry full-rigged ships, opening the way for centuries of commerce. Her disappearance gave birth to the first Great Lakes shipwreck legend, a ghost ship tale that predates even the United States itself. For La Salle, her loss was devastating. He pressed on with his explorations, but without her cargo, he lost financial backing and credibility. His dream of a French empire through the Mississippi ended in disappointment. Folklore and ghost ship legends. Over the centuries, sailors told stories of a phantom brig appearing in fog, square sails full, a griffin carved at her bow. She would appear suddenly, then vanish just as quickly. Some claimed the Griffin was cursed, doomed to sail the lakes forever, never reaching port. Others said she still guards her treasure of furs, lost in the cold waters. These stories endure in the folklore of the Great Lakes, making Le Griffin as much a myth as a ship. Closing reflection. The mystery of Le Griffin is as old as European settlement in the Great Lakes. She was the first of her kind, and the first to vanish. Was she sunk by storm? Betrayed by mutiny? Lost to greed, or simply swallowed by the lake's vastness? We may never know. What we do know is this: somewhere beneath the waves of Lake Michigan, Huron, or Superior, the timbers of Le Griffin may still lie. If she is ever found, she will be the oldest wreck in the Great Lakes, and perhaps the most important. Until then, she remains a ghost ship of history, her sails invisible but her legend eternal.